Chapter 140, Gold and Silver Trees. In the potion room, Dewey set the cauldron and lit the fire. He added dew collected on a full moon, brought the water to a boil, then stirred in 2 spoonfuls of mugwort infusion, 6 turns clockwise, then 6 counterclockwise. He dripped in 6 drops of earthworm juice, stirring once clockwise and once counterclockwise after each drop until the juice was fully incorporated. The brew turned green, smelling bitter and of fresh earth. Dewey lowered the heat and added 10 drops of dragon blood. The liquid reddened and then simmered at low temperature for 3 days. On the 4th day, he tossed in figs and boiled it for another day, then filtered the potion 3 times to remove impurities. He brought it back to the flame and added 7 drops of giant spider venom, stirring 7 times clockwise and once counterclockwise. After a vigorous 15-minute boil, he dropped in 7 strands of Legolas's hair, an improvisation because there are no unicorns in this world. With that substitution, the mixture behaved exactly as Professor Sprout's notes had promised. He removed the cauldron from the fire and let it cool. For 7 days he waited. On the 7th day, the liquid had become a bright, quicksilver silver. The growth potion, used to accelerate the growth of magical plants, was complete. Dewey filled 3 crystal bottles and stored them in an empty potion cabinet on the other side of the tower. Growth potion was a specialist brew, indispensable to estate owners who cultivated potion herbs and to master herbologists, but largely unknown to ordinary folk. Dewey had only learned the recipe after acquiring the memories and expertise of Professor Sprout. Now, bottle in hand, he could scarcely contain his excitement. Outside, the mountaintop castle was a hive of activity. Dwarf craftsmen bustled with pulleys and levers, stone and timber moving with efficient, practiced labor. Smaug, economizing in the only way a dragon could, airlifted massive loads of stone and timber from distant quarries, saving a vast amount of manpower and expense. Dewey let them work and slipped away to the garden area that Balin, the castle's designer, had laid out. At the center of the garden, a magically warded space marked the spots where he had buried 2 precious seeds. Dewey had ringed each planting bed with stone bricks. The beds lay 100 meters apart. Tiny sprouts had just pushed through the soil in both beds. One sprout shimmered with golden light, warm and life-filled, like a tree of the sun. The other gleamed silver-white, cool and sacred as moonlight. Seeing them brought a smile to Dewey's face. Ever since he planted the seeds, he had tended them with the stream water Galadriel had gifted, and their slow start had worried him until these first shoots finally appeared. He uncorked a growth potion bottle and let 1 drop fall onto the malorn. Dewey called it the melon tree sprout. The seedling drank the potion eagerly, and under Dewey's watchful eyes, it began to grow visibly. In a few breaths, it rose from a tender shoot to a sapling 1/2 meter tall. 1 drop equaled a month's natural growth. Thrilled, Dewey gave it 10 more drops in quick succession. From where the dwarf craftsmen were working, a shadow suddenly fell across the yard. They looked up and gaped. A tree, at least 20 meters tall and still elongating, had burst into being at the garden's center. Silver-gray bark ran up a straight, stately trunk. Broad, fan-shaped leaves gleamed like sheets of beaten gold in the sun. The whole tree sparkled, and the dwarves, whose taste for grandeur ran deep, could not look away. Balin, who had walked many lands, stepped forward and recognized the species. "A malorn from Lorien?" he murmured, voice tight with wonder. "It earns its reputation." No less remarkable, 100 meters away the silver-white tree had unfurled. It grew with a sinuous grace, twisting and coiling like a sleeping dragon. Its leaves were dark green above, silver beneath, catching the light with a cool, misty glow. Where the 2 trees stood, 1 gold, 1 silver, the garden brightened, the air seeming cleaner and fresher. Magic thickened noticeably around them, and Dewey felt it. The white tree's influence spread outward. Grass greened, flowers bloomed, and creatures felt light and healthy under its sway. Dewey still had 1/2 a bottle of growth potion left, but he did not push the plants further. Accelerating growth too far would strip a tree of foundation and vigor that would undo the purpose of the potion. Instead, he harvested. He clipped leaves from the white tree and from the malorn. The white tree's sap could mend wounds, neutralize poisons, and help dispel dark enchantments. The malorn's leaves were used by the Elves of Lorien to wrap lembas, that preserved well and restored strength. A single bite of lambas could sustain a traveler for a day, making malorn fruit and leaves invaluable for potion making and provisioning. Satisfied with his harvest, Dewey withdrew a small spatial bag and, grimacing, cast a bubblehead charm to block the stench. He reached inside and poured dragon dung fertilizer at the tree's roots, the best soil enrichment he could imagine. Professor Sprout's herbology notes praised dragon dung for magical flora, and Smogg's was of a potency that outmatched dragons of other worlds. Dewey forced himself to hold his nose while spreading the dung, tolerating Smogg's curious glances and the dragon's specially reserved lavatory arrangements. He covered the fertilizer with soil, cast a few cleaning charms, and left with only a faint lingering whiff. Back in the tower, Dewey climbed to the 6th floor's herbology garden. He entered the chamber where his king's grass grew and felt warmth wash over him. The room had become a vast enclosed habitat, several times the size of a playing field, its ceiling too high to see, painted sky and drifting clouds arched overhead. A warm sun flooded the space, and a gentle breeze ruffled the lake's surface. Water lilies rocked, fish darted, butterflies threaded between flowers. The 100 or so plants of king's grass that had once been withered now stood lush and healthy, pushing out new leaves. Dewey conjured a watering can, added a few drops of growth potion, diluted it with water, and sprinkled it across the king's grass. The plants leaped forward, blooming, seeding. When the seeds ripened, he gathered them, scattered them on the far side of the garden, and watered again. They sprouted and filled the bed. "With this much king's grass, I won't run short of herbs," Dewey said, pleased, and fed the patch with dragon dung. Then he whispered, "Guide me," and a beam of light shot from his wand toward a hillside beyond the lake. He followed the beam and discovered a plant tucked in the grass, hidden but thriving. A grin crossed his face. "So you were hiding here." He pulled up the plant, his mandrake, and it responded with outrage. It twisted and scrabbled, producing a shriek that could be lethal. Dewey had cast a silencing charm on himself, and unbothered by the plant's fury, teased it until it calmed. He fed 3 drops of growth potion into its mouth. The mandrake's angry screams ceased. It smacked its lips and looked at him with hopeful little eyes. 3 more drops, and Dewey set it on the soil. It burrowed down, grew rapidly, bloomed with purple flowers that withered into 3 orange apple-like fruits. When they were ripe, he cut them open, took the pulp into crystal bottles, and saved the seeds. Mandrake fruit pulp was a rare, top-grade potion ingredient. The seeds he planted and watered with growth potion produced 3 new mandrakes that sprouted fully formed and magical without the previous fuss. He fed them dragon dung to ensure robust growth, then moved through the rest of the garden rooms. Everywhere he worked, he used growth potion sparingly and followed it with dragon dung. By the time he stepped back into the tower lobby, both the bottles of growth potion and the last of the dragon dung were gone. The results, however, were more than worth the expense. King's grass proliferated, mandrakes multiplied, and the 2 great trees, gold and silver, stood like guardians of the new garden. Dewey smiled. From now on, his magical plants and potion supplies would no longer be scarce. He could be self-sufficient. Chapter 141, Deviled Egg. After leaving the herb garden, Dewey cast a dozen cleansing charms and sank into a fragrant bath until the foul stench that had lodged in his mind finally eased. Refreshed and with his senses clear, he returned to the potion room. This time he would not brew another growth potion. He was preparing a dark arts concoction. He set out a silver cauldron and filled it with river water drawn from the Mirkwood streams, water already tainted by sorcery. He added a whole crocodile heart, covered the cauldron, and let it simmer on a low flame for 7 days. At midnight on the 7th night, he introduced 10 fertilized chicken eggs, stirring 42 times clockwise with his wand, then 7 times counterclockwise. He filtered away the flocculent residue through a pure gold sieve, reheated the liquid, and dripped in 7 drops of giant bat heart blood. 7 crushed poisonous snake fangs followed. He stirred 13 times counterclockwise and brought the brew to a boil. The potion turned a pale purple. He mashed mandrake pulp, folded it in, stirred 9 times clockwise, and let it simmer on a low heat for 9 hours. When the simmering finished, he removed the cauldron from the fire, added 10 drops of giant spider venom, stirred 10 times counterclockwise, and left the potion where moonlight could touch it overnight. By morning, the mixture had deepened to a rich purple. He then mixed in the brain matter of 3 toads, 3 times clockwise, 3 times counterclockwise, and finally, on the night of the new moon, he released 7 drops of dragon blood into the bowl. The potion, needing no flame, began to boil of its own accord and reddened to the color of fresh blood. Thus, the fertility potion was completed. Its property was simple and terrible. Anyone who drank it, regardless of gender or even species, could conceive. The cost made it a work of the dark arts. The child would take everything from its mother, life, magic, even the soul, and at the moment it separated from the mother, it would kill her outright. The potion also required exact astrological timing and a ritual to work. That precise alignment was fast approaching. Dusk found him at the Barrow Downs. An owl had flown from the castle tower and, passing over Bree, lighted on the ancient burial mounds. Dewey shifted back into human form and studied the landscape. The Barrow Downs were steeped in death, lingering hatred, despair, and the taint of the Witch King of Angmar. It was perfect, a natural reservoir of evil energy for the dark arts ritual he planned. High above, Helluin, the star the elves call Helluin and others call Sirius, rode the sky. Dewey watched it climb. The star had meaning here. When the firstborn elves woke on the shores of Quevianan, Helluin was the first light they saw. It has since symbolized starlight, guidance, and the blessing of Varda. Dewey had long noticed that Middle-earth bore surprising echoes of the world he remembered. The world had been reshaped long ago, from a flat plane into a sphere, after Numenor's hubris and Iluvatar's intervention. The undying lands of Aman were hidden from sight. One could no longer simply sail west and reach Valinor. The constellations were the same, the skies only renamed. Helluin here was the Sirius he knew. He found a clearing, drew a 7-pointed star in dragon's blood, and carved dark arts runes into the soil. From his pocket, he produced a 7-year-old rooster and, with solemn movements, injected the fertility potion into its body before laying it at the center of the star. As Helluin rose to its highest point, Dewey pointed his wand and intoned the rites. The dragon blood lines flared with blood-red fire. A palpable hunger ran through the air. The rune's gravity gathered the Barrow Downs' malignant energy, and the landscape's resentment and despair flowed toward the magic circle in a single, churning vortex. The commotion awakened the Barrow Wights, who screamed and rattled in their tombs as their power bled away. The red flames grew black at the edges, tainted and scorching. At the appointed moment, Dewey cast into the 7 burning points 7 components he had prepared. Giant spider venom, a troll's heart, an orc's liver, warg teeth, a giant bat's wings, earthworm teeth, and skulls of Barrow Wights. The flames consumed the offerings and shot upward like a column, devouring the malignant energy for miles around. The Barrow Wights were stripped of most of their power and collapsed back into reluctant sleep. Activated by the array, Helluin poured starlight down in a rain of shimmering spears. The rooster at the center became frantic, clucking and twisting in the blood-scorched circle. The star's cold radiance and the surrounding dark energy streamed into the bird, battering its body, reshaping its tissue. Magic ground through flesh. The rooster cried out with a keen, thin sound. The infusion forced its reproductive cells to rupture into unnatural growth. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the flames guttered and the roar of power faded away. Silence settled over the Barrow Downs. After a timeless moment, the rooster cocked its head, gave one final, uncanny crow, and laid a single black egg that pulsed with a strange aura. With that, it died. Dewey crossed into the circle and knelt beside the fallen bird. The egg was smaller than a common chicken egg, but heavy with power. He could feel the lethal fusion in it. Starlight and dark arts braided into something corrupt and alive. Under the right incubation, it would hatch into the most feared of dark creatures, the basilisk. He had prepared for the possibility. Basilisks are not merely dangerous beasts. They are magical predators of the highest order. A direct look from one kills outright. Even reflected eye contact turns flesh to stone. Only restorative draughts made from mature mandrake can reverse such petrification. Basilisk venom is nearly unrivaled in lethality. Aside from phoenix tears, no known antidote will neutralize it. Their natural resistance to spells makes them almost impervious to magical attack. They grow stronger and larger with age and can live for extraordinary spans. Their curse is balanced by a singular weakness, an instinctive terror of a rooster's crow, perhaps because they originate from roosters. A rooster's cry will send a basilisk into panic and, with repeated exposure, can weaken or even kill it. That weakness, however, fades as a basilisk ages. Elder specimens can shrug off a cock's warning. Worse, basilisks obey only parseltongue commands. Dark wizards who tried to breed them often found themselves the first victims. For these reasons, the ministry forbids breeding basilisks, if such laws meant anything in the darker corners of the world. Dewey slid the black egg into a padded case and tucked it away. He waved his wand and laid the rooster into the earth, covering it over with careful hands. Then he broke the circle and let the runes die. The ritual had done more than create an egg. The seven-pointed array had siphoned away the millennia of rancor that had soaked the Barrow Downs. The old resentments and despair that fed the whites were nearly gone. Even the ancient spirits buried deep in the mounds were exhausted, their revival postponed perhaps for centuries. With everything in order, he shifted his form with a practiced spell. Feathers grew over his hands and face, beak and wings formed. He became an owl and launched into the night, heading for Weathertop underneath a dark, star-swept sky. Chapter 142, Birth of the Basilisk. The first recorded basilisk in the magical world had been bred by Herbo the Horrible, a Greek dark wizard who spoke Parseltongue. After many grim experiments, he discovered a method that, to most, seemed perverse and unnatural. Place a rooster's egg beneath a toad and let it be incubated. 7 days later, a great snake with extraordinary abilities would hatch, a basilisk. The birthing method Dewey had acquired when he signed in at Goblin Town came from Herbo. No one knew exactly how Herbo had arrived at the idea of getting a rooster to lay an egg and having a toad incubate it, but Dewey followed the instructions to the letter. Back at Weathertop, he went down to the Water of Weeping, found a large, fat toad, magically fixed it to a dark rooster's egg, and sealed them in a closed room to incubate. If nothing went wrong, the basilisk would hatch on the 7th day. Once the setup was complete, Dewey returned to his meditation chamber. He cast a protective ward around the incubation room, threw melon tree leaves onto the Gubraith cell fire, and let the room fill with a sweet, sun-warm perfume. He sank into the sofa, murmured an otherworldly chant, and slipped into meditation. The music he intoned was ethereal and laced with subtle magic. It hung in the air and kept the fire in the hearth dancing as if to its tune. Time in meditation always moved strangely fast. When he finally opened his eyes, it was bright daylight outside the tower. He had not slept all night, yet felt invigorated rather than exhausted. The months of steady meditation had begun to show results. His spirit and soul were clearer, and he could feel his power increasing in a way that made further advancement feel only a matter of time. If he kept this pace, Dewey thought, years rather than decades might be enough to reach the level of the great arch-wizards, Dumbledore, Grindelwald, even Voldemort in his prime. If fortune and longevity favored him, perhaps one day he could rival figures like Elrond or Galadriel, perhaps in some distant future aspire to something approaching Maya's strength. He smiled at the thought. It was true that Gandalf, a Maya, often seemed less flashy than Elrond or Galadriel, but that was because his power was deliberately restrained in Middle-earth. Without his staff, he was limited. Unleashed, Amaya's power was of a different order entirely. Still, Dewey told himself, one step at a time. Besides checking the incubation each day, he maintained his meditation practice and threw himself into alchemy. The more he read from Abraham's book, the more his alchemical ability improved. The staff he had made for Tom Bombadil had been an early experiment. Clever and beautiful, but more ornamental than practical. This time, Dewey aimed at a useful, common alchemical artifact, a quick quotes quill. He had been saving feathers shed by Thorondor, the great eagle, and selected several magnificent plumes for the job. Alchemy, unlike many branches of magic, dealt with transforming matter. The alchemist needed to grasp the essence of materials and with spells, potions, and circles, guide magical power to reshape that essence. At its pinnacle stood the Philosopher's Stone, capable of turning lead into gold permanently, a material change, not merely a temporary transfiguration. Transfiguration might turn something into gold, but the effect would break if the spell were dispelled or the object destroyed. Alchemical effects, when properly embedded at the material level, could be permanent. Dewey was far from creating a philosopher's stone, but he could stabilize spells into objects. The Quick Quotes quill would combine levitation, legilimency, voice recognition, and automatic writing charms into a single pen that could record the owner's thoughts and words without drawing on their continual magic. Late one afternoon in the alchemy room, there was a sharp explosion. The entire tower shuddered. The dwarf craftsmen outside glanced toward the windows and then went back to their work. They'd grown accustomed to occasional blasts from Dewey's tower. Inside, Dewey examined a feather that had been reduced to ash, dispelled the protective charm around the workbench, set a fresh plume into the array, and resumed his work. At last, the quill was finished. The pen gleamed with a metallic sheen, and its shaft was etched with dense, tadpole-like runes. Dewey fed a pulse of magic into it. The quill stirred as if waking, slipped from his hand, and darted about the room like a living thing. "Show me what you can do," he said experimentally. The quill twitched, then flew to a blank parchment, and, in an elegant hand, wrote the sentence Dewey had just spoken. He continued speaking, and the quill faithfully transcribed every word, catching even muffled or whispered tones. He pressed his wand to his temple and drew out a silver thread of memory. The quill absorbed it, flew to a blank-bound book, inscribed Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, in large golden letters on the cover, then turned the page and began copying the book's contents in dark green ink with astonishing speed and neatness. Dewey watched the pen dutifully record the spells and tomes he had acquired through signing in. He could summon those books at will, and others could not see them, but redundancy was prudent. If the system ever glitched or his own memory failed, he wanted a physical backup. He planned to make the tower's 8th floor a library, collecting texts from every race in Middle-earth. Knowledge was power. Rowena Ravenclaw's maxim, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure," held just as true here as anywhere else. Great figures, whether Gandalf, Elrond, or Galadriel, had always been storied for their wisdom as much as for their power. Even Sauron, in his guise as Anatar, had earned the elves' admiration through sheer craft and knowledge. If Dewey hoped to go further, he would need to accumulate knowledge and temper it into wisdom. With the quill copying away, Dewey turned his attention back to the egg. The 7th night approached, and he watched the sealed room with growing vigilance. A basilisk's danger began the instant it was born. A newborn's gaze and venom could kill. Even as a parseltongue, Dewey was not immune to the basilisk's petrifying stare. He could command and control one, but he could not afford to be careless. Just after midnight on the 7th day, he sat outside the incubation room wearing sunglasses, watching the toad sprawled over the dark rooster's egg. The once plump toad was thin and weak from the prolonged incubation. Its limbs barely twitched. Suddenly, the egg shuddered. Dewey stiffened. Something inside the shell was trying to force a way out. With a soft, audible crack, the eggshell split and an opening appeared. A flash of emerald peeked through, then a tiny head began to push out. Dewey hissed softly in Parseltongue, "Close your eyes before you come out." The sound of his own hiss echoed in the small chamber. The emerald shape halted. When a slim, emerald-green snake no thicker than a pinky finally crawled free, it kept its eyes shut, flicked a small red-feathered crest, and tasted the air with a red forked tongue. Even as a newborn, it carried the imprint of its dark breeding. It looked nothing like a harmless hatchling. The danger was palpable. Almost at once, the little basilisk lunged at the toad that had incubated it and bit. The toad gave a few spasms and was dead in an instant. Dewey's face tightened. The day's lessons made sense. Basilisks were creatures of lethal instinct. Had he lacked the ability to speak Parseltongue, the hatchling might have struck at him first. Prepared, Dewey relaxed the basilisk with a Parseltongue command and drew a thin needle to collect a minute drop of its blood. The snake hissed, but did not retaliate. He then pricked his own finger with his wand and let a drop of his blood hover beside the basilisk's in a tenuous weave of magic. With a quiet incantation, he caused the 2 droplets to merge in midair and told the basilisk, "Open your mouth." Obediently, the little creature opened its jaws. The blended blood slid into its mouth. The moment it swallowed, an invisible bond snapped into place between Dewey and the basilisk. The link did not make the creature blind or stupid, but it made the basilisk instinctively affectionate and disinclined to harm him. Dewey exhaled. The bond was not a perfect safeguard. The basilisk remained a dangerously lethal being, but now at least it would be loyal to him. The birth had gone as the grim old texts predicted, terrible, swift, and irrevocable. As he watched the tiny emerald head flicker and the red crest bristle, Dewey felt that old mix of exhilaration and dread. He had succeeded in creating a basilisk. He had also taken a step deeper into the darker corners of magic, and there was no turning back. Chapter 143, Hogwarts Castle. The basilisk coiled around Dewey's wrist like a bracelet of jade, and he couldn't help smiling. He had just performed a variant of the Blood Oath, a binding ritual that traditionally made both parties promise not to harm one another. His version, however, bound only the basilisk. It guaranteed that the creature could never hurt him while leaving him free. He'd even used the basilisk itself as the vessel for the oath. Unless the creature died, the oath could not be broken. That meant he could raise it without anxiety. Under the oath, the basilisk instinctively closed its eyes whenever Dewey appeared, preventing even accidental injury. "From now on, your name is Hairbow," Dewey said. He was terrible at names, so he'd chosen a practical one, shortened from Vile Hairbow, the name of the first person in the magical world to breed a basilisk. Afterwards, he secured Hairbow in a sealed chamber, reinforcing and magically locking the door so the beast couldn't escape and no one could break in. There were thousands of dwarves around the tower, and villagers hired to prepare their food. Inside the tower were Edward, who acted as butler, and Legolas, recently returned from Mirkwood. When the castle was completely finished, Dewey planned to build a chamber of secrets within the mountain to keep the basilisk safely contained. Time marched on, and the castle neared completion. Perched atop Weathertop was a magnificent fortress. A tall, thick wall ran along the cliff's rim, forming a wide ring around the peak. A broad walkway crowned the wall so sentinels could patrol its length. On the outer side were crenellations, arrow slits, and lookout posts at regular intervals. A towering gatehouse rose over the entrance, flanked by twin bronze doors. These doors, the work of dwarf smiths and dragonfire-smelted bronze smog had procured from the far north, were inlaid with intricate patterns and hidden mechanisms. Once shut, they could not be forced from the outside. Inside the gate lay a great lawn bisected by a straight white gravel road leading to a fountain before the main keep. The spring that fed the fountain came from deep inside Weathertop. The dwarves had tunneled nearly 1,000 meters to reach it. Above the fountain stood a gilded dragon statue, a compromise championed by Smaug himself. He had even contributed some of his own gold toward the project. Dewey had vetoed the dwarves' suggestion to carve his likeness at the entrance. He preferred not to be greeted by his own statue every time a guest arrived. Overflow from the fountain ran toward the gardens, flowing between a melon tree and a white tree into a small lake tucked in a natural hollow. From there, the water slipped through the wall and poured down the western cliff into the Water of Weeping far below. The dwarves had expanded the original Amansul into a sprawling main keep of huge stones, an 8-story central building surrounded by towers and annexes. Amansul remained the tallest spire, the rest clustered at its base. From a distance, the complex looked like a giant rocket with many booster stages. Inside the walls were greenhouses, stables, servants' bank, quarters, and other support buildings. Amansul itself remained Dewey's residence, but stepping out of his tower, he entered a vast hall big enough for thousands, intended for state banquets, balls, ceremonies, and for Dewey to receive subjects and conduct affairs. Kitchens, storerooms, conference chambers, and guest suites ringed the hall. "Duir, what do you think? Any changes?" Balin, who had overseen construction, asked as he led Dewey on a tour. "The dwarves' work is exquisite. I have no objections," Dewey said, eyes bright. Then, with a rueful half-smile, "But how can I possibly live in such a castle by myself?" Balin laughed. The place could easily hold thousands, yet only Dewey and Legolas, staying as a guest, lived there permanently. Edward split his time between the tower and Hogsmeade at the mountain's base, lately spending much of his free time with Anna, Chief Luke's daughter. Balin waved a hand. "You're a lord now. Lords need attendants, servants, guards, and guests will come. It won't be empty for long. Dewey thought of the work that needed doing. The cleaning, the gardens, feeding Thorondor the hatchling, Smaug the dragon, Hairbow the basilisk, and even the giant spiders. He would be spending much of his time in study and meditation, not running day-to-day chores. Balin's words made him realize the castle would need people. By the way, Balin added, the underground tunnel's almost finished. Want to see it? Dewey's face lit up. They followed a stair that led from the main hall down into the basement and out through a back door into a yawning, shadowed cave. A narrow stone staircase hugged the cliff wall and plunged into the dark. Dewey released a glowing orb to light their descent and keep them from misstepping. At the bottom, a hidden stone door appeared. This is the back exit, Balin said proudly. The door's mechanism won't yield to brute force. You need a special key. He produced a golden key and handed it to Dewey. The doorway looked eerily like the back door of the Lonely Mountain. Dewey's eyebrow lifted. He found a nearly invisible keyhole and turned the key. Gears ground, a dull clank answered, and the stone door opened inward, letting a shaft of daylight in. They ducked through. Beyond the door was a roomy natural cavern, and at its floor, a river ran out of the mountain. This connects to the swamp outside, Balin explained. We'll dig the swamp into a lake and moor a few boats here. It will be a natural barrier and a crucial escape route if ever needed. How long will it take? Dewey asked. Balin grinned. With Smaug's help, less than half a month. Smaug's involvement had a simple explanation. He had been the one to ferry virtually all the stone, timber, and metal for the castle by air, hauling supplies from afar rather than paying dwarven wages. The dwarves had assumed Smaug's interest was only for treasure, but they hadn't expected him to be so miserly with coin that he would do the work himself. Balin teased that Dewey had gained an extremely diligent and thrifty accountant. Dewey laughed and promised to tell Smaug the plan. The dragon, after all, was eager to see the dwarves finish and leave. He hated seeing his hoard siphoned off to pay for wine and provisions. Less than 2 weeks later, the swamp had been dug out into a vast crescent-shaped lake at the foot of Weathertop. It wrapped around the mountain on the east and north, closing off approaches and forming a natural moat. Hogsmeade sat across the water, and the only road to the peak now ran over an arched stone bridge spanning the lake. Beyond the bridge, a broad road wound up to the bronze gates. Dewey stood looking at the finished work and smiled. He named the castle Hogwarts. With the walls, fountains, halls, and hidden tunnels in place, it was finally complete. Chapter 144, Banquet Invitation. With the castle completed, Duir held another banquet, an even grander affair than the last. Alongside the dwarven craftsmen and the villagers from the mountain's base, the guest list read like a roll call of the region's most notable folk. Duir had invited Bard, Lord of the River Valley City, Beorn from the eastern bank of the Anduin, Elrond of Rivendell with his twin sons Elrohir and Eladan, Lord Celeborn and Lady Galadriel of Lorien with Princess Arwen, Thranduil of the Woodland Realm, Radagast the Brown of Rosgobel, Tom and Goldberry from the Old Forest. He had sent an invitation to Thorin Oakenshield of the Lonely Mountain, and naturally to Bilbo. From nearby Bree, he had asked the mayor and the proprietor of the Prancing Pony. In short, Duir invited just about anyone he could reach by the Floo network, everyone with a fireplace on that map. The only person he could not contact was Gandalf. Ever since the flying broomstick had appeared, Gandalf had grown even more elusive. No one could say where he was. Beyond celebrating the castle's completion, the banquet served as Duir's formal declaration of ownership over Amon Sul and the lands around Weathertop. The mountaintop was unusually lively that day. Villagers from Hogsmeade at the foot of the hill dressed in their best and arrived early to help prepare. Hogsmeade was no longer the small hamlet it had been. In just a few months, its population had swelled to over 1,000 souls, after Mayor Luke's careful screening to exclude brigands and criminals. Had he not done so, the number would have been far greater. On the main road from Bree to Weathertop, a handsome carriage made good time. Outside, along with the coachman and a servant, rode a small escort of militiamen. Inside sat Bree's mare, Graham Tend Rory, and Mr. Buttercup, proprietor of the Prancing Pony, who had hitched a ride. Mayor Rory came from a family that had once held noble rank. Though the title had long since vanished, he still wore the pride of that lineage. The Rory family had been dominant in Bree for generations. Mr. Buttercup, despite appearing merely an innkeeper, ran the town's only inn, the Prancing Pony, where merchants, rangers, bards, dwarves, and even travelers from elven realms stopped for rest. The inn had long been a hub of news and information. Buttercup himself carried considerable influence in the town. That was why he traveled in the mayor's carriage to attend Duir's banquet. "Mr. Buttercup," Mayor Rory asked uneasily as they rode, his round face showing discomfort. "You deal with Wizard Duir most often. What sort of man is he?" Rory had met Duir just once, during the Lonely Mountain expedition, when he awarded Duir a medal for dealing with the so-called Gujong corpse demon. It had seemed a minor matter to him then. But after Amon Sul reappeared on Weathertop and Duir established a tower there, Rory had paid the situation closer attention. The tower sat uncomfortably close to Bree, and when Luke left Bree to become mayor of the settlement at the hill's base, Rory had begun to worry. If Duir proclaimed territory, would Bree fall inside it? If so, what would happen to him? He'd had a frightful reminder of Duir's power half a year earlier, when the wizard showed up with a giant dragon, and he had seen that dragon fly to Chetwood near Bree, scorching the crowns of ancient trees with a single breath, then sweep back toward Weathertop on wings so vast they darkened the sky. The memory still made him gulp. Buttercup chuckled and shook his head. "Mayor, you put me in a spot. I've seen Lord Duir a few times, but I've never had a long conversation. I can't give you a full biography. But from what I've heard," he continued, his voice tinged with admiration, "Lord Duir is a generous man. He only levies a 1% tax on his people, and that money goes straight back to public needs. He doesn't skim a coin for himself." Rory stared, incredulous. "Only 1%? How then does he pay for the castle and these lavish banquets?" Buttercup smiled. "You forget, he subdued that giant dragon at the Lonely Mountain. They say he acquired a hoard like a small mountain. With treasure like that, he doesn't need to squeeze his subjects dry. Besides, who would dare try to pilfer a coin guarded by a dragon?" He cast a sideways glance at Rory. Rory's face blanched at the memory of the dragon's terrible bulk. No one sane would. At that moment, the coachman called from outside, "Mayor Hogsmeade." Conversation stopped. Both men leaned to the window and watched the road split off the east-west highway and head north through a village backed by a broad, placid lake and surrounded by lush fields. High stone walls enclosed the settlement. Along the main street stood shops and taverns, giving the place the air of a small town rather than a hamlet. The streets were clean, with public baths and privies, bins placed at intervals, and people employed to sweep and maintain the lanes, their wages paid from that 1% levy. Most villagers had already gone up to the castle to help with preparations. Only the very young and the very old remained to greet arrivals and come to the banquet later. An elderly gatekeeper, seeing the carriage and its escort, walked out and bowed. "Sir, are you here for the banquet?" he asked. The mayor's servant jumped down, handed the man an invitation, and replied, "Our master is the mayor of Bree. He's been invited by Lord Duir." The old gatekeeper's face brightened. "Ah, mayor, please, come in." He swung the gate wide and let the carriage pass. Through the window, Mayor Rory watched the orderly village with a mixture of shock and something like envy. Luke had been lucky, he thought bitterly, to find a lord like Duir. The carriage rolled onto the lake, and the sight there silenced them again. A stout stone bridge, crafted by dwarves, spanned the water, the only approach to Weathertop. Where once had been a swamp called the Water of Weeping, dangerous and mosquito-ridden, there was now a broad, clear lake, its surface as smooth as glass. The lake mirrored the hill and the castle that crowned it. Above the reflection rose the castle, magnificent against the sky. Amon Sul's tallest tower pierced upward. Two tall trees, one golden, one silvery, caught the sunlight and seemed to blaze with their own light, bathing the castle in a sacred glow. The sight held everyone, mayor, innkeeper, coachman, and escort alike, in open-mouthed wonder. For a moment, it felt as if they had arrived in a different world. They crossed the stone bridge in a hush of reverence and rolled up the wide, level road like pilgrims. When the carriage drew up before the castle gates, everyone's breath caught at the sight close up. Two great bronze doors yawned open beneath a towering gatehouse, their surfaces alive with scenes from the Battle of the Lonely Mountain. Elves, dwarves, and men raising blades in triumph, while orcs and trolls fled below. Above it all, a figure sat astride a colossal dragon, staff alight with magic fire, a godlike presence dominating the battlefield. Even a king's palace would seldom boast such spectacle, Mayor Lucky thought, his chest tight with a mixture of awe and envy. Villagers stood at the gate to welcome guests, their clothing tidy and their smiles poised. Mayor Lucky looked at them with a little surprise. Their manners had the easy refinement of minor nobles. He felt awkward by comparison. If they could read his thoughts, they would be pleased. In truth, they had been copying Legolas's bearing since the elf had sojourned there, wanting above all else not to embarrass Lord Duir. The effect had been better than anyone had expected. The servant's voice at the carriage door brought Lucky back to himself. "Mayor, we have arrived. You may disembark, sir." Mayor Lucky and Mr. Buttercup, proprietor of the Prancing Pony, climbed out. The carriage stopped before a grand fountain, dominated by a golden dragon statue. Lucky swallowed. There could be no doubt that it was carved from pure gold. It was too ostentatious. He forced his eyes away so as not to stare impertinently. As they rounded the fountain, the road led through lamplit avenues flanked by two enormous trees that could be seen from the valley below. Up close, the golden tree rose over 100 meters, its fan-like leaves shimmering in the late light and bathing half of Weathertop in a warm, gilded glow. The silver tree, not as tall but sinuous as a coiling dragon, caught the sun in a pearly sheen and poured moonlight across the other half. Mayor Lucky didn't need to be told that these were no ordinary trees. At the hall entrance, he stopped short. "Mr. Lucky, it has been a long time," Village Chief Luke said with a bright, practiced smile. "I am in charge of receiving for Lord Duir's banquet. Welcome." "And Mr. Buttercup, I didn't expect you to arrive with the mayor. We were going to fetch you from the inn," Luke added. Lucky forced a stiff answer. He had not forgotten how, years ago, he had used his authority in Bree to push Luke aside and drive him out. Now Luke sat as Chief of Hogsmeade, a subject in Duir's domain, and might be highly regarded by his lord. A panic of imagination flared. What if Luke bore old grudges and schemed against him? But Luke's manner remained civil and hospitable as he led them inside. The main hall stole their breath. It was vast, hewn of pale stone with a vaulted, towering roof that could have held 1,000 people. Thousands of candles hovered in the air, casting a warm glow. The ceiling itself looked like the open sky, blue, flecked with clouds, sunlight falling as if from heaven. 4 long tables ran parallel through the hall. On the left, 2 tables were packed with dwarves, booming laughter, and a steady stream of drinking contests. Floating musical instruments drifted above the raised dice, where a long table and a large golden chair waited at the far end. The instruments tried to play, but the dwarves complained that the tune sounded like a funeral march. Demanding new airs, each dwarf called a different tune. The instruments obliged, overloaded, and finally vomited forth a chaotic cacophony. The dwarves howled with laughter until the instruments, in petulant temper, flew down and rapped the offenders on their heads. Laughter then rose so loud it seemed to shake the candles. Mayor Lucky and Mr. Buttercup watched as if in a dream. Luke guided them to the 2 outermost seats at the front table. "Mr. Lucky, Mr. Buttercup, you are guests of Lord Duir. These are your places." Lucky's face flushed. It was one thing for Buttercup to sit on the edge, but his own place, second from the end on the left, felt like a deliberate slight. As mayor of Bree, he had expected to be placed beside Duir, not tucked out near the edge. He cast a half-accusing glance at Luke. Was this a grudge? He swallowed an urge to storm off. This was Lord Duir's house, and he would not make trouble. Instead, he put on a brittle smile and asked, "There are many empty seats. Who will be taking them? Perhaps I know some of these people." Luke answered with the same easy politeness, as if he had not heard offense in Lucky's tone. "They will be chairs for many nobles. The human lord from River Valley City, the king of the dwarves of the Undermountain, the elven king of the Woodland Realm, the lords of Lorien and Rivendell, the lord of the Anduin Valley, and others." The names tumbled out like thunder. Lucky felt suddenly small and ridiculous. Compared to those titles, his own mayoralty seemed provincial. The indignation fizzled. He sat down with a humbled air. Buttercup, on the other hand, could only grin. His wine had been supplied to the castle for the feast, and the sight of the dwarves guzzling it already sounded like coins jingling in his pocket. Luke excused himself and went about his duties. Meanwhile, high in Amonsul, Duir was receiving guests by a different method, through the green flames that licked fireplaces. The first to arrive had been Bilbo, bearing hobbit ale, then Legolas, who came from the woodland realm carrying Thranduil's gift, an ornate brooch set with pale gems. Legolas explained that it was blessed by the Wood Elves, a charm granting affinity with the forest and its protections. Duir accepted the brooch with care. Bjorn arrived next, the skin changer, bringing a barrel of royal jelly wrought by his great bees, a tonic that promised vigor and stamina. After him came Bard of River Valley City and Fili, Thorin's heir, Fili sent in place of the king under the mountain. Duir was not surprised that Thorin himself had not attended, although Fili's presence did draw a moment's interest. Edward shepherded the newcomers toward the main hall, while Duir lingered in his high room. Green flames ran along the fireplace, and a graceful figure stepped out. "Arwen, what brings you here?" Duir asked, brightening. Arwen's eyes shone like evening stars. "You do not seem displeased, then?" she asked archly. "Of course not," Duir said at once, waving his hands. He noticed a speck of dust on her robes and, on impulse, cast a cleaning charm. Arwen smiled in thanks. "The flue powder you made is remarkable," she said. "Its only fault is the dust. When I travel between Rivendell and Lorien, I must tidy myself afterward." "It is not perfect yet," Duir conceded with a grin. Arwen looked at him with amusement. "You sound as though you expect I will make some scene." "You must be mistaken," Duir protested, hands spread in mock innocence. "If you like, I will teach you the cleaning charm," she said lightly. "Then the dust will trouble you no more." "It's a deal," Duir said. "Agreed." Their laughter was interrupted as green flames burned again, and the elven twins Elrohir and Elladan stepped through. They eyed the pair with a flicker of brotherly suspicion, then curiosity. "Duir promised to teach me a spell," Arwen said, and the twins, immediate in their greed, begged to be taught more. Duir did not refuse. "After the banquet," he promised, "you may stay a few days and I will teach you." They glowed at the offer. Before they could plan lessons, the fireplace flared a third time. "Lord Elrond!" Duir exclaimed. He had supposed Arwen and the twins represented Rivendell. Elrond's appearance was an unexpected honor. Elrond smiled, a touch of mystery in his expression. "I am not the final guest," he said. "There are more important arrivals yet." Then, with a hush that seemed to hold the room, the green flames parted, and Lady Galadriel stepped from them. No dust dared cling to her. Her robes were pristine, her hair, woven gold and silver, seemed to catch the light into itself. A halo of serenity surrounded her, as though the very air trembled to be near. She inclined her head, and even the candles bent their glow in deference. "Duir," she said softly, and the simple greeting carried the weight of winters and starlight. Chapter 146, The Crown. When Elrond and Galadriel arrived, Dewey's surprise was genuine. He stepped forward, beaming. "Lord Elrond, Lady Galadriel, your presence honors Hogwarts." Elrond smiled and offered his congratulations. "Well done, Dewey. Weathertop has a fine lord now. Eriador will be safer for it." He nodded to his eldest son. Elladan stepped forward and produced a flat, spatial pouch. "I had a portion of Rivendell's libraries copied for you. These are books on elven magic, spells, and theories of craft. I hope you will find them useful." Dewey's eyes lit up. He recognized the telltale expansion of an undetectable extension charm and knew how much could fit inside. With trembling hands, he opened the pouch and found it packed with thousands of books. He could hardly contain his joy. "My thanks, Lord Elrond. This is priceless." Books in Middle-earth were rarities of a different order. They carried the hard-won wisdom of ages. So much had been lost to war and fire that Rivendell's holdings were treasures beyond gold. Elrond's gift was a carefully chosen offering, and Dewey received it like one who had been given a new legacy. If Elrond had come prepared with knowledge, Galadriel had come bearing something else. She turned to Arwen, who stood beside Dewey, and Arwen produced a slim, exquisitely carved wooden box covered in vine motifs. "This is a gift from my grandmother," she said. Dewey opened the box with eager fingers. A shaft of light spilled out, and inside lay a magnificent crown fashioned to resemble the white tree itself. Its silver branches were woven into a circlet, leaves of varying widths layered in a natural flowing pattern as if a breeze had just passed through them. In the center sat a white gem that glittered like starlight, bright but gentle, like a small star set into silver. Duir could only stare. "This is," he began, but words failed him. Arwen smiled, quietly proud. "I designed it, inspired by the gem worn by my grandfather Arundel. My grandmother infused the central stone with starlight so that even in darkness it will shine." Duir swallowed, steadying himself. "It's too precious. Lady Galadriel, how could I possibly deserve this?" Galadriel stepped forward. Her long frame cast a graceful shadow. "Value is not only in the object, but in the meaning you give it," she said softly. "May it shine brighter for what you do with it." Before Duir fully comprehended her words, Galadriel lifted the crown from the box and placed it upon his head. Starlight pooled around him. The crown bathed him in a soft, luminous aura that transformed his bearing into something noble and mysterious. He looked every bit like a midnight sovereign. Around the hall, eyes widened and a murmur of admiration passed through the gathered guests. Arwen's face shone with pleasure, as if her design had found its perfect wearer. Galadriel gave a satisfied nod. "If there are no more guests expected," Galadriel said, "would you show us your castle?" "Of course. Please follow me." Duir bowed and led them through the corridors. Aside from Tom and Goldberry, everyone invited had arrived or had sent representatives, so there was no need to wait. As they walked, the elves examined Duir's work with approval. Dwarven stonecraft might be rough in temperament, the elves conceded, but its skill was unquestionable. After all, Menegroth's hall had been carved at the dwarves' hand in distant days. When Duir returned to the great hall with the elves, silence fell. Every eye turned toward them, the elves themselves, tall and graceful, and the beautiful female elf who seemed to draw gazes as inevitably as a flame draws moths. Duir, crowned with starlight, stood out as well. He led his guests to the head table, intending to place Galadriel in the central golden chair, but she refused with a small, amused smile. "Tonight you are the host. We will not steal your thunder." Elrond nodded. Duir took his place at the head, with Galadriel and Elrond to his left and right. Arwen sat beside Galadriel. Elladan, Elrohir, and Legolas took seats near Elrond. Bilbo, Bard, Fili, and Beorn clustered together. Mayor Lachi and Barlaman Butterbur sat nearby, visibly respectful. Seeing Duir at the head, regal with the star gem upon him and conversing with the two elves beside him, one softly noble, the other luminous and queenly, made even seasoned locals feel suddenly very small. The conversation at the table turned to the hall itself, the floating candles, the enchanted ceiling, and the self-playing instruments. Galadriel, Elrond, and Duir spoke animatedly about the magical principles at work. Arwen leaned in to listen, watching Duir with interest. There was a softness in her expression that betrayed her admiration. When all the guests had arrived, the music stilled and a hush fell over the hall. Duir rose, looked out over the long tables crowded with villagers and dwarves, and felt a rush of exhilaration, an intoxicating reminder of why power could be so alluring. He pushed the feeling aside and smiled, spreading his hands. "Let the banquet begin." At the word, platters, fruits, and flagons appeared at every place. Gasps and exclamations filled the hall, people staring at the sudden abundance, incredulous and delighted. The instruments resumed, playing the joyful, enchanted tune Tom Bombadil had once taught Duir. The music itself carried a pleasant magic. Smiles spread, and laughter followed. Across the table, Arwen looked at the feast and asked, surprised, "Did you conjure these foods?" Duir shook his head and laughed. "Not conjured from nothing. The villagers prepared everything in the kitchens. I simply summoned it here. Magic can't make a meal from thin air." Relief and curiosity rippled through the guests. Duir didn't mention the weeks of practice and the hidden practicalities. 4 kitchen tables, arranged and magically linked to the tables in the hall so that the summons would work flawlessly. The explanation was enough. The banquet roared to life. As dishes were passed and wine circulated, the dwarves, warmed and unself-conscious with drink, demanded rousing war songs. The musicians obliged, and the hall grew louder with stomps and shouts. Later, while the revelry continued, Duir and a small party of elves excused themselves and slipped out to the garden. They walked to a pavilion set between two magnificent trees, the white tree and the melon tree, near a quiet lake. The night deepened, and the trees glowed under the moon. Even the elves could not hide their astonishment. "If I didn't know Lady Galadriel had only given you the melon tree seed a few months ago, I'd have thought these grew here for decades," Elrond said, admiring the twin trunks of silver and gold. Galadriel stood between the two, her gaze distant. "They remind me of the two trees of Valinor," she murmured. On the hill of Azelohar, Laurelin and Telperion shone in turn, gold and silver, lighting all of Valinor. Lost in memory, she reached out and touched the melon tree's silvery bark. From her fingertip came a spill of starlight, and the power of Naria flowed into the trunk like a warm current. The melon tree shivered with life. From its branches blossomed dense clusters of golden flowers that glowed softly, like a scattering of little suns threaded through the leaves. Elrond smiled. "They are twins. One should not outshine the other." He laid a hand on the holy white tree and let Vilya's power pass into it. Its vitality swelled as if fed by some potent spring. Snow-white blossoms unfurled along its boughs with astonishing speed, each cluster delicate as frost, each petal like a tiny, shimmering flake. Under the silver and gold canopy, the pavilion filled with the scent of fresh bloom, and the quiet light of two trees returned to fullness, an echo of far-off Valinor set for a moment beneath an Eriador sky. Chapter 147, Join the White Council. The Malorn and the white tree burst into bloom, and their perfumes filled the castle at once. The Malorn's scent was like warm sunlight, comforting and golden. The white tree's fragrance was cool and clarifying, sharpening the spirit. Duir's eyes brightened. This white scent was clearly a boon to the mind. Used in meditation, its effects would be remarkable. "Thank you, Lady Galadriel, Lord Elrond," Duir said, truly grateful. "Without you, I do not know how long it would have taken these trees to blossom." He could have credited the growth potion he had used earlier, but he knew that potion could not substitute for deep, centuries-old roots. It was the difference between herbs that sprang up wild on a mountainside and those carefully cultivated for generations, similar to look at, but profoundly different in potency. What Galadriel and Elrond had done with the power of the elven rings had restored that deep foundation to the twin trees. Galadriel and Elrond accepted his thanks with gentle smiles, and the group settled again in the fragrance-heavy courtyard. Soft music and laughter drifted from the castle halls. Yet here in the quiet garden, Duir and his companions seemed a world apart, content in a peaceful moment beneath moonlight and lamplight. "Duir, what are your plans from here?" Elrond asked at last. "Plans," Duir started. "Lord Elrond, did you have something in mind?" Elrond's response was formal. "We came for a purpose. We wish to invite you to join the White Council. Will you accept?" Duir's surprise must have shown. "Join the White Council?" He turned to Galadriel, who watched him without betraying any emotion. "But doesn't that require the consent of all members? Does Gandalf know? Saruman is the head. Wouldn't he have to agree?" "This was Mithrandir's suggestion," Galadriel said. "He speaks highly of you. He believes your deeds against Sauron prove your will and ability to stand against evil. Elrond and I agree." "Gandalf praises me too much," Duir protested, self-conscious. The council's members were among Middle-earth's greatest and longest lived. Was it not presumptuous to include a young man like him? "Do not be modest," Galadriel replied. "You struck Sauron down at Dol Guldur with us. You subdued Smaug the dragon, and you played a decisive role in the victory at the Battle of Five Armies. 2 generations of orc chieftains fell by your hand. The White Council exists to oppose Sauron and his darkness. Mithrandir, Elrond, and I believe you should be part of that effort." She rose and walked to the edge of the pavilion, looking out over the mountainside. "As for Saruman, when he turned from the light, he ceased to be our leader. Outwardly, we have not yet deposed him, to avoid unnecessary upheaval," Galadriel continued, her tone cool. "But his degeneration is no longer conjecture." Duir asked cautiously, "Lady, have you found proof of Saruman's betrayal? Until now, we only foresaw it by prophecy." Galadriel nodded, disappointment in her face. "Mithrandir went to Isengard to investigate. To avoid arousing suspicion, I sent Saruman a message to draw him away while Mithrandir entered Orthanc. In Saruman's workshop, they discovered a palantir tainted by Sauron's power, and blueprints for forging a ring. Duir's surprise deepened. So Saruman hooked up with Sauron that quickly? It appears so, Elrond said. If Saruman is allowed to fall entirely into Sauron's hands, he could use Isengard's position to cut the north-south road, and with Mordor in the east, menace both Gondor and Rohan. So our course is clear, Galadriel added. We cannot alert him. For now, we must prepare, consolidate our strength, ready Gondor and Rohan against eastern assault, and only when we can be sure to control him should the White Council act against Orthanc. Duir frowned. Why not lure Saruman out and surround him? Galadriel's look was sharp. We tried that before. It only made him more watchful. Do not underestimate Saruman's cunning. He sees even the smallest flicker as easily as a candle in the dark. More importantly, even united, we may not be able to control him. He is the greatest of the wizards and wields a very potent staff. If he chooses to leave, we cannot detain him. Duir absorbed that, humbled. Even together, you cannot hold him? No, Elrond said simply. Galadriel turned back to him. So, Duir, will you stand with us? Will you join the White Council and take your place among those who resist the shadow? Duir did not hesitate. I have no reason to refuse. A bright, relieved smile crossed Galadriel's face, and Elrond's expression eased. Welcome to our ranks, Elrond said. Elrond then introduced Duir to the rest of the council. Besides Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond, the members included Galadriel's husband Celeborn and Cerdon, Lord of the Grey Havens. With Duir's joining, the council would once again number 7, Saruman's fall having left only 6. Their mission, Elrond explained, was to oppose Sauron, curb the spread of his dark influence, and keep peace in Middle-earth. For Duir, membership would open priceless resources, direct intelligence on events across the land, access to Rivendell's libraries and ancient lore, and teaching about the world's origins, the powers of the Valar, and deeper rules of the arts. After the invitation, Galadriel and Elrond did not linger long. They returned to Lothlorien and Rivendell through the fireplaces. Arwen, Elrohir, and Elladan chose to remain for a while to study magic with Duir. The feast in the castle went on until midnight. Villagers trickled back down to Hogsmeade, chattering excitedly about the elves' grace and the Lord's splendid crown. The dwarves, ever reluctant to sleep, kept the hall alive with drinking and bawdy jokes. Mayor Lucky and the proprietor of the Prancing Pony were shown to their rooms by the butler Edward. Duir, Bilbo, the 3 elven siblings, Legolas and Beorn, spent the night in the tall tower. Bard, anxious about his children, slipped home via the fireplace after the meal. The next morning, the dwarves prepared to depart. Duir stood before the 1,000 dwarf craftsmen who had spent months building the castle and spoke so that all could hear, his voice calm but carrying. You have our deepest thanks for your work. Before you leave, I have 2 gifts for you. The dwarves blinked. They had come to build, not expecting any reward beyond payment. Curious faces leaned in as Duir waved his wand. 1,000 gold coins glimmered and flew from his pocket, clinking as they landed into waiting hands. A single coin? For many, the gift seemed small, until Duir explained. Each coin is enchanted. If someone nearby bears ill intent toward you, the coin will heat up as a warning. Skepticism turned to astonishment. A prankish dwarf crept up on a bald companion, intent on a jest. The bald one hissed, "Hey, it's hot!" and leapt back, rubbing his scalp. Harper, what were you about to do? Harper, caught, grinned awkwardly. Just thought I'd pluck a hair and test the coin. It works, the bald dwarf declared, hastily shielding his carefully styled remaining locks. The others began trying minor tricks on one another and were repeatedly foiled by the warm coins. Old Balin, watching, felt the weight of his coin differently, like it meant more than its metal, and thanked Duir earnestly. This is no small gift. In danger, it could save a life. Duir waved the thanks away. A small token. You worked hard for this castle. I could not be ungrateful. The coin enchantments had taken little effort, simple alchemy and an adaptation of the scrying mirror warning devices he had studied, but they proved practical. Then Duir produced a second, more singular gift and entrusted it to Balin's safekeeping, a silver flask. Balin's eyes widened. What is this? This is another of my alchemical devices, Duir said plainly. Pour in clear water and it becomes fine wine. Balin could hardly contain himself. May I? Duir nodded. Balin hurried to the fountain, filled the flask, and returned. The moment he uncorked it, a rich, heady aroma spilled out, full-bodied wine, fragrant and mature. Balin's face split into a delighted grin that would not be contained. Chapter 148, Teaching Magic. The dwarves finally departed, taking 2 gifts from Dewey. They especially treasured the silver wine pot that could pour out truly fine wine. It became a permanent symbol of friendship between the Lonely Mountain and Weathertop, and a fixture at every banquet. Balin and Feely used the fireplace to travel to the River Valley city first, then returned to the Lonely Mountain. The mayor of Bree, Lucky, and the owner of the Prancing Pony returned to Bree the next day by the same means, leaving only their coachmen and militiamen to travel back the old way. After the guests left, Hogwarts Castle grew quiet. Only Dewey remained with Arwen, her brothers Elrohir and Elladan, Legolas, Bjorn, Bilbo, and the butler Edward. Luke, the village chief, still climbed the mountain every few days to report in. The castle's construction was finished, but for Dewey the real work had only begun. This Hogwarts was only a shell compared to the great school of magic in its original world. There were no moving staircases yet, no animated suits of armor, and the place still needed runic enchantments and alchemical fortifications to resist spell attacks. Dewey had also promised to teach Arwen and the others magic. Following the maxim that teaching one is like teaching many, Dewey gathered everyone with wands and taught them together. He set aside a room in one of the towers as a classroom and took the platform to act as professor. Seated below were Arwen, Elrohir, Elladan, Legolas, and Bjorn, 5 expectant students. Dewey produced a copy of Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, tapped it with his wand, and watched the book multiply into 5 identical copies that flew into each student's hands. "This is Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, he said. "It covers basic spells and principles. Consider it your introduction. Take a look." Elrohir read the cover and then looked up with curiosity. "Dewey, if this is Grade 1, are there Grade 2 and 3 as well?" Dewey smiled and corrected him gently. "Yes, there are Grades 2, 3, 4, and onward. The spells grow more difficult as the grades increase, and during class, remember to call me Professor." "All right, Professor Dewey," Elrohir answered obediently. Dewey felt satisfied. He had never expected to be a professor, and with pupils whose average age exceeded 1,000 years, he found the role oddly pleasant. Teaching them was even easier than he'd hoped. Elves seemed born for magic, quick, perceptive, able to understand with only a hint. Arwen produced a holy lumos, then made the glowing ball float free from her wand. Elrohir and Elladan used a levitation charm to lift 2 tables, sending them bobbing up and down. Legolas summoned controlled, roaring flames, altering temperature and direction with ease. Dewey could only laugh inwardly. His students were so talented that he felt almost unnecessary. That changed when he looked at Bjorn. Finally, there was a pupil who made the teacher useful. Bjorn had good magical aptitude, but next to elves, who were often centuries old, he seemed ordinary. Dewey relished the chance to guide him. While instructing the elves and Bjorn, Dewey set to work carving runes into the castle walls. The runes would grant the castle solidity, longevity, waterproofing, and fire resistance, enchantments meant to make the structure stand for 1,000 years. The castle was vast. Nearly every stone needed runic inscription. The task was as immense as the original build. Dewey had no intention of doing it all himself. He enlisted Elrohir, Elladan, Arwen, and Legolas to help. After teaching them the runes, he let them share the labor, carving rune after rune into brick and stone. It was both practical and instructive, a perfect test of their progress. He had thought of using the dwarf craftsmen, but carving active runes required continual magical power. Without magic, carved symbols would be inert. So the elves, eager to learn a script they had never seen, volunteered gladly. Dewey was generous with knowledge. He divided the contents of the spellbook series into standard spells grades 1 through 7, placed them in the library, excluding certain dark arts, and made them available for study. He even taught the elves the Patronus charm. Progress on that charm was slow. Patronuses require intense, joyful emotion, and elves are naturally calm and restrained. They managed only a few pale silver wisps. Bjorn, however, surprised them all. After a month of practice, he produced a full Patronus in the form of a giant bear. The elves did not mind. Their temperament favored patience and restraint. Extreme emotions were dangerous to them and sometimes fatal, so they cultivated steadiness. If something came easily, fine. If not, they accepted it quietly. A year passed like a breath. Every wall bore runes. The dense inscriptions formed an invisible grid of power, and the castle seemed to breathe. To the elves' keen senses, each stone hummed with life instead of lying cold and inanimate. Suits of armor now stood along corridors, silent unless needed. In an alarm, they would animate and defend, merciless in battle. Dewey had made 108 alchemical armored guards and stationed them throughout the castle. There were tall stone statues everywhere, including 1,000 dwarf sculptures carved by the dwarf craftsmen as a gift. Dewey had asked each craftsman to carve a likeness of himself as a token of thanks. They made themselves tall and proud. Dewey inscribed the statues with runes and enchanted them so they normally remained still, but could awaken in an emergency to serve the castle. He also solidified spells into the tower staircases with alchemy. The steps could move laterally and lift upward. Standing on them transported people along them, like magical elevators. Slowly, piece by piece, a genuinely magical castle had taken shape. For the immortal elves, a year was a blink. They recalled the fall of a single set of leaves and scarcely noticed time passing. For Dewey, it was a long, relentless stretch of labor. Beneath the tall gold and silver trees, a carpet of fallen leaves had already gathered. The twin trees' influence made the grounds lush, and Dewey had filled the garden with transplanted specimens from his herb beds, the unfading golden bells of alpharin, the broad-petaled snowthorns, the golden star-shaped stars of the sun, and the 8-hued entwife's flowers. Life animated the grounds. One morning, an elf maiden stood beneath a melon tree and called up in a voice like the breeze, "Thorondor, come out for food." High in the melon tree, a delicate treehouse and several platforms, like Lorien dwellings, nestled among the branches. A spiral white staircase wound around the trunk to the top, where a gigantic nest sat. The young Thorondor poked his head out, saw the familiar figure below, and gave a delighted, piercing cry. He launched himself from the 100-meter-high nest and began his descent, wings still unready, his flight awkward and clumsy. Mid-glide, he lost balance and plunged toward the ground. The elf flicked her wand, arrested his fall, and slowly lowered him. "Coo-coo," the young eagle mumbled, head tucked under his wing, embarrassed. The elf laughed and stroked his feathers. "You did very well, Thorondor. Keep practicing. When your wings are stronger, you'll take the whole sky." The young eagle peered up, uncertain. "Of course," she promised warmly. "You're only young now. When you grow a bit, the sky will be yours." She produced a palm-sized packet wrapped in a melon leaf. "Look what I brought. Land boss I made myself. It will help you grow. Do you like it?" The eagle gave a joyful cry and rubbed affectionately against her. She unwrapped the outer leaf, took the thin, flat land boss out, broke off half, and fed it to him. He swallowed it at once, surprised to realize he hadn't tasted it before. He looked up with big eyes, pleading for the rest. "Be good, Thorondor," she admonished with a smile. "Lambos is complex to make. What you just ate is enough to last days. If you eat more now, you'll get a stomachache." The eaglet whined and nuzzled until she relented, breaking off a little more and handing it over. He crunched it slowly, savoring the treat. "Arwen, you're spoiling Thorondor," Dewey said as he came into the garden, amusement in his eyes but a mock scolding in his voice. "Landboss takes ages to make. You might as well throw pearls to swine." Thorondor's feathers bristled at once. He emitted a series of indignant cries. How could anyone compare him to a pig? Chapter 149. Kill the Giant Spider. "I told you something, and you're still sulking?" Dewey ruffled the fledgling eagle's head. The bird was taller than him now, but Dewey's hand was quick and playful. "Edward said you haven't been eating properly. Turns out you've been mooching off Arwen." Thorondor looked ashamed and wouldn't meet Dewey's eyes, like a child who'd been caught. Since Dewey had moved the nest from the tower to the melon tree, the young eagle had grown used to Arwen, who stayed in the treehouse often and sometimes fed him. Thorondor had developed a picky appetite and clearly preferred food prepared by elves to plain dried meat. "All right, Duir," Arwen said indulgently as she stroked the bird. "Thorondor is still young. If he likes lambus, I'll make more. He's still growing. Lambus has good energy for him." Dewey could only watch, a little envious, as Thorondor rubbed against Arwen. Humans hadn't even tasted lambus yet, and the fledgling was already being spoiled. He cleared his throat and changed the subject. Arwen, would you like to visit the Woodland Realm? Arwen's eyes lit up. You're going to the Woodland Realm? Dewey nodded. They've been fighting giant spiders there. They're organizing a major counterattack to push the spiders out of Mirkwood. Legolas is heading back to join the battle and invited me. I accepted. Then I'll go too, Arwen said without hesitation. Apart from Rivendell and Lorien, I haven't visited any other elven realms. Good, get ready, Dewey smiled. We leave tomorrow. Thorondor cooed urgently. Dewey rolled his eyes. What are you fussing about? You can't even fly properly. Mirkwood would just make you spider bait. The eagle pouted and turned his back, then gave Arwen a pitiful look. Arwen smiled and shook her head. Thorondor, you're too young for battle. Stay home and wait for us. When we return, I'll make you Lorien melon nutcakes. That placated him. After a little bargaining, Arwen added another month's supply of land boss, and Thorondor finally quieted down. Dewey watched them with a rueful smile. A doting guardian indeed spoils their charge. The next day, after leaving Edward to guard the castle and mind Thorondor, Dewey set out with Arwen, Legolas, and the twin brothers Elrohir and Elladan. Beorn had already gone back to the Anduin Valley to tend his animals. Dewey carried a suitcase that made the others curious, but he didn't offer any explanation. They used the fireplaces to travel and arrived one by one at the Woodland Realm's palace. King Thranduil awaited them in the Great Hall. Welcome, welcome, Lord of Amansul, to the Woodland Realm. Thranduil stepped down from his throne with a sweeping gesture, including Elrohir, Elladan, and Arwen in his greeting. Perhaps because of the looming campaign, he wore splendid armor that lent him an imposing, severe air. Your Majesty, Dewey said, inclining his head. He showed the white gemstone brooch pinned at his collar. The brooch bore the Wood Elves' blessing, an attunement to the forest, and Dewey had worn it deliberately for this expedition. Thranduil's smile deepened when he saw it. I'm glad you like it, the king said. No thanks are necessary. On the contrary, Dewey replied, I should thank you for looking after Legolas. He seems much brighter than when I last saw him. Thranduil's expression towards Legolas was full of pride. He also noticed traces of the magic Legolas had learned from Dewey and was grateful that Dewey had taught him. Magic knowledge had always been closely held among the elves, and Thranduil appreciated the favor. Legolas frowned at his father's armor. Father, are you going out to battle today? Why the haste? Thranduil's voice grew serious. Those spawn of Ungoliant are cunning. They've sensed something and are calling kin from the southern forests. We must strike quickly and decisively before they can organize a proper resistance. Please let me fight, Legolas asked at once. Thranduil did not refuse. He did, however, offer an apology to the guests. I'm afraid there will be no welcoming feast today. When the blight is cleared and the forest is safe, I will host a banquet. Dewey waved it off. We came at Legolas's invitation to help. When you leave, allow us to come with you. Elrohir, Elladan, and Arwen echoed the request. Thranduil welcomed their aid. He had intended to wipe out the giant spiders in Mirkwood and was glad for any competent hands. A horn sounded, and the Woodland Realm's warriors assembled. Legolas joined the army as vanguard. The elven column moved swiftly through Mirkwood in a broad formation heading south. Dewey rode one of the king's great elks, a gentle mount he was allowed to use. It was Dewey's first time on an elk. The huge antlers fascinated him. If you like it, this elk is yours, Thranduil offered. Dewey laughed and waved him off. He already had enough animals. Taking another would mean opening a menagerie. Thranduil focused back on the campaign. Dewey's attention, though, was on the white gem at his chest. The brooch came alive in the living wood. The forest seemed to reach in return. Trees hummed, small creatures' panicked breaths and scurrying movements became clear. Through that communion, Dewey sensed something else, giant spiders clinging high in the trees 100 meters ahead. He started to warn the others, but the elves had already seen them. A flurry of arrows glinted in the air and struck the spiders' heads. The creatures plummeted. Elven warriors finished them with a single stroke. The whole encounter resolved in a few heartbeats, swift, precise, and utterly practiced. Dewey swallowed the warning that hadn't needed to be spoken. Watching the spider corpses dot the forest floor, Dewey asked Thranduil quietly, "May I have these bodies?" Thranduil looked surprised. The dead creatures were a blight on the land, and left to decay would poison soil and streams. He'd meant to gather and burn them. Still, if Dewey wanted them, he would not refuse. Very well, he said. Dewey used Asio to bring the carcasses to him, dismounted, and uncorked a conjured glass bottle. He drew a little of the spider's eerie green venom into it and sealed the rest of the bodies in a spatial pouch. Elrohir watched with curiosity. "What are you going to do with giant spiders, Duir?" he asked. Dewey shook the bottle so the venom sloshed inside, its color giving off an uncanny glow. "Their venom is invaluable. It's excellent for powerful antidotes and for enhancing magical items." He explained what he'd already discovered. These spiders weren't unlike the acromantulas of the wizarding world, and their venom could replace acromantula venom, often rarer and pricier, while being even more potent. Dewey intended to collect venom while he could. He planned to catch a few live spiders to breed in a dedicated space at the tower, lest they be wiped out in Mirkwood and become forever scarce. He also had other uses for the bodies. He would harvest their nerves for wand cores and feed the carcasses to the serpent monster Heelbo back home. Acromantulas had always been a delicacy to the basilisk-like beast. Giant spiders were an even greater tonic. The 2 spiders the Heelbo had eaten earlier had prompted a molt and a surge in its internal magic. Dewey's trip, then, was part battle, part resource gathering, both for the forest and for his own menagerie of magical creatures. Chapter 150, Spider Food Reserves, Mirkwood. As the elven host pushed deeper into the southern reaches of the forest, giant spiders became more numerous. The elven warriors moved through the trees with the lithe grace of deer, leaping from trunk to branch as if the canopy were open ground, rapidly clearing several nests. At the vanguard, Legolas stood apart. Instead of relying only on bow and arrow, he favored his wand, casting small, precise spells with the same effortless skill he applied to archery. He moved like a restless stag, a blur between trunks, and each quick incantation sent another 8-legged predator tumbling from the heights. Legolas did not use grand, draining magic. He preferred spells like the Leg-Locking Curse and Tarantalegra, simple, fast, and perfectly suited to immobilize giant spiders. Under those charms, the spiders' legs seized or forced them into spasmodic dances. They fell in handfuls and were finished quickly by the waiting elves with a single, clean stroke. Watching from the rear, Thranduil could not hide his pride. He turned to Dewey with a warm smile. "Duir, Legolas has learned much from you. I am deeply grateful." Dewey waved it away with a smile. "He is a friend and has been a great help to me as well." When the elves brought down more spiders, Dewey's eyes lit up. He hurried forward to the fresh carcasses, flicked his wand and turned a few leaves into glass bottles, then began extracting venom. It had to be gathered quickly before the material spoiled. Once the spiders were wholly dead, the venom coagulated and went to waste. He tucked each corpse into his spatial pouch as he worked. The pouch already held hundreds of spider bodies, more than enough to keep the basilisk fed for a long stretch. And Dewey had done no hard labor at all, simply following behind the front line and collecting the spoils. He confessed, with a grin, that the whole thing felt indulgently good, and he hoped for more. Thranduil noticed and promptly ordered several attendants to send more carcasses to Dewey. The advance continued, pushing south until the elves reached the old road that cut through the dense forest. There, the march came to a halt. The spiders had responded to the invasion and massed an ambush. 1,000 giant spiders had woven a wall of webs across the path from ground to canopy, an enormous net stretching east to west and effectively bisecting Mirkwood. The elven blades could not make quick work of the silk. Spider silk was both incredibly strong and disastrously sticky. Swords snagged and jammed, and even after cutting a layer, dozens more remained. Time and patience would be needed, time the spiders were trying to deny them. Elrohir and Eladon stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the battlefield changes quickly," Elrohir urged. "These spiders mean only to slow us. We cannot give them respite. Let us and Legolas clear a way." "We learned much from Dewey," Eladon added. "We can put it to use." Arwen stepped forward too. Her gentleness hardened into a fearless composure, beauty and a warrior's resolve braided into one. "Count me in," Thranduil nodded. "Then I trouble you to do so." Dew watched them prepare and offered help. Arwen shook her head with a teasing smile. Professors should not step in. Let the students show what they've learned. She echoed a private joke from their lessons. Dewey smiled and relented, replying, "Fine, I'll leave the heroics to you. I'll be the one who picks up the corpses afterward." "Since you like those strange creatures, I'll bring you more as a dutiful student," Arwen said, barely keeping a laugh. Elrohir hurried them onward. Dewey and Arwen shared a quick, conspiratorial look and then joined their companions as the four of them, Elrohir, Eladon, Legolas, and Arwen, coordinated their magic. They raised their wands and spoke together. Diffindo. 4 white shafts of light met and magnified each other, slicing a great opening through the webbing and blasting a clear path for 10 meters beyond. They didn't stop. The 4 pushed through the breach and continued clearing the way. The main host surged forward through their gap and struck the masked spiders. From their aerial positions, the spiders lashed with silk and stung with venomous barbs. Legolas, Arwen, Elrohir, and Eladon moved like ghosts between trunks, their wands a constant rain of counterspells. Arwen was astonishing. Light as a leaf, she vaulted up trunks and twisted through branches, a wand in one hand and a short sword in the other. No longer merely the noble Undomiel of Lothlorien, she fought like an elf warrior, precise, quick, and unflinching. She could pause in mid-leap, spin, and send a spider tumbling from its perch with a kick. Dewey watched her with unabashed admiration. Where once she had seemed the embodiment of high elven beauty, now she also shone with strength and resolve, like a goddess tempered for battle. Thranduil, watching, found himself wishing that Legolas and Arwen had been drawn together. He smiled with the indulgence of a father who imagined such a match. The 3 elven men were impressive in their own right. Their speed and reflexes, combined with magic, sent spiders falling like rain. Archers and foot soldiers joined the fray. In short order, the 1,000-strong swarm began to break and scatter, fleeing south in a panicked tide. The elves pursued, cutting down many more. Bodies accumulated along the old road and were sent back to Dewey for collection. He accepted them with delight. Several barrels of venom now sat in his custody, and his pouch bulged with carcasses. It was a peculiar kind of hoard, yet Dewey felt it prudent. Dark creatures would become scarcer once Sauron fell, and the basilisk's appetite was only growing. It would not be long before these provisions were needed. The pursuit pressed on beyond the old road and deeper south, but the warriors soon met a different kind of obstacle. The forest itself bore the spiders' corruption. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, leaves blackened and rotten, soil and streams tainted by soporific and hypnotic magic. A faint, hallucinatory venom hung in the air. In such an atmosphere, the elves found movement perilous. Both the land and their own senses deceived them, and spiders lurked in the shadows ready to strike. They were not unprepared. The scouts produced silk scarves, soaked in medicinal solutions brewed by elven healers. The scarves covered mouths and noses, cutting some of the poisonous influence. Dewey received one as well. It smelled of fresh herbs and brightened the head, but it was only palliative, not a cure. He instead raised his staff, tapping it with a quiet charm. The emerald in its tip flared, and then the staff began to spew bubbles, thousands of iridescent spheres that drifted like a soft rain. Each bubble floated gently to an elven head and settled, forming a shimmering dome. The bubbles filtered the air as they passed, leaving each wearer breathing fresh, clean air beneath their glossy shields. The warriors blinked and then smiled in relief. Thranduil, pleased at the result, nudged a bubble toward the head of his elk and let it settle so the mount breathed clear air as well. He turned to Dewey with thanks. "Duir, you have aided us greatly once more." Dewey held up a hand modestly, then noticed Thranduil had not taken a bubble for himself. "Your Majesty, shall I add one for you?" Thranduil straightened, regal and disdainful of the idea. "No need. These gases cannot harm me." He would not mar his bearing with a translucent bubble. It was simply too inelegant. Chapter 151. The Basilisk Appears. Dewey's bubblehead charm had nullified the poisonous gas that had been choking the air, and the elf warriors were no longer hindered. With renewed confidence, they surged south, cutting down every giant spider that stood in their path. Those spiders that survived fled in a frantic rout. In a matter of hours, the elves had reclaimed half of Mirkwood. But the victory felt wrong. No spiders appeared ahead, none in the paths, none in the nests. It was as if the forest itself had been abandoned. They pressed on for dozens of miles. The same emptiness continued. In the spider lairs, they found only half-eaten carcasses and clutch upon clutch of unhatched eggs. The spiders had clearly left in haste. The elation of reclaimed ground evaporated into unease. Giant spiders were cunning. Such an emptying of their nests could mean only one thing. They had gathered elsewhere, likely to the south. If all of them had clustered together, the elves facing them would be confronting overwhelming numbers. Duir forbade the troops from smashing the eggs. He collected them instead, black pearl-like eggs that could be frozen into potion ingredients, hatched later for brewing, or used as reserve food for his serpent monster Bilbo. They advanced south with heavy caution. Then a commotion in the trees announced a new arrival. Arrows went up before bowstrings even reached full draw, but the newcomer called out quickly and disarmed the tension. Radagast the Brown sat in a rickety wooden sled drawn by massive rabbits and skidded to a stop among them. "Radagast, why are you here?" Duir called, stepping forward. Radagast's eyes sparkled at the sight of him. "Ah, Duir, good to see you. I came to warn the elves." Thranduil frowned. "Warn us of what?" "All the spiders are gathering in the south, thousands of them. The whole forest is shaking with fear. I am frightened myself." Radagast's voice rose with the alarm he carried. "They're preparing to attack. They're led by a spider queen, Senetha. She's the largest spider in the woods, bigger than my cottage, and she serves that dark lord. She's gathered them to wipe you out." Hearing the brown wizard's hurried account, Thranduil's face turned grave. Duir barely had time to be surprised. He had not expected a spider queen in Mirkwood, much less one linked to Sauron. Thranduil did not hesitate. He ordered the army to march south to root out the spiders, and Radagast joined them as guide. The queen's lair lay at Mirkwood's southern reaches, not far from Dol Guldur. The canopy there grew unnaturally dense, webbing and leaves layered so thickly that sunlight could not find purchase. For generations, the giant spiders had woven their domain into the forest. Trunks and branches were blanketed in webs that formed tunnels and chambers, a labyrinthine spider kingdom with copper-colored walls and iron-like barriers of woven silk. Other creatures could barely move through it. Too often they became prey. When they entered the valley, the elves saw the vast expanse of webbed fortifications ahead. This was no place for simple destruction. Thranduil's jaw tightened. If they failed to eliminate the spiders now, the colony would breed again and push north, threatening the woodland realm inexorably. Legolas stepped forward. "Father, let me take a small force through those spider passages and drive them out." "No," Thranduil replied immediately. "There may be thousands inside, or the Spider Queen herself. It would be a trap." "But if we don't act, they'll only return," Legolas protested. "Duir has taught me new magics. I can protect myself." Thranduil would not be swayed. They stood arguing when Duir spoke up. "If the webs can't be broken easily, we could use fire," he suggested. Both Thranduil and Legolas turned to him in surprise. Thranduil had considered the idea. Burning would consume the webs and the spiders, but the cost would be the forest itself. Mirkwood was home to the elves. They could not casually raze it. Radagast, whose devotion to plants bordered on reverence, recoiled at even the thought. He had come to love the living things of the woods so fiercely that he could not accept intentional harm to the forests. Reluctantly, Duir let the idea go. He knew he could control a fire to prevent it from spreading, but he understood the elves' unwillingness to risk their home, so he offered a riskier, stranger plan. "I have another way to drive them out," he said. "It's dangerous. Will you permit it?" Thranduil's curiosity overcame prudence. "What is it?" Duir withdrew a small leather case from his spatial pouch. Thranduil immediately felt a chill. The case hummed with an aura of the dark arts, something neither he nor the other elves had encountered. "What is that?" he asked. "It's a creature I raised," Duir said quietly. "A basilisk. Its gaze is deadly. Ordinary life cannot meet its eyes without being petrified. Even a reflected glance through a mirror will turn someone to stone." The name alone silenced the commanders. Thranduil exchanged a grave look with Legolas and Arwen. None of them had known Duir kept such a thing. Duir's voice was steady. "If you agree, I will send the basilisk into the spider tunnels to force them out. But everyone must not look directly at it. If anyone does, I cannot promise their safety." Thranduil weighed the risks. then nodded. He issued a strict order. No one was to look at the creature once it emerged. The elves prepared themselves. Though they closed their eyes, their senses were not blind. Elves like Thranduil could perceive with a clarity almost equal to sight, and some could even sense through their minds. Still, they obeyed Dewey's command and averted their gaze. Dewey opened the leather case and stepped back. A second later, something enormous unfurled from its dark depths. A green serpent at least 10 meters long, its body thick as an adult's torso, crowned with a tuft of blood-red feathers. The air around it shimmered with a sinister, ancient magic. Everyone else squeezed their eyes shut, but in their heightened perception they could feel its presence, a titanic serpent exuding the aura of the dark arts. Dewey did not close his eyes. He had sealed a blood oath with his serpent monster, Bilbo. By that pact, the creature could not harm him. In fact, whenever Bilbo saw Dewey, it often averted its own eyes as a sign of the bond. The serpent had grown quickly after feeding on 2 captive giant spiders in the tower. Even with its eyes shut, it sensed everything. The scent of the forest, the heat signatures of living creatures, the vibrations of the ground. It flicked its forked tongue and thumped its tail against the earth in excitement. "Master, food, delicious food," came a sibilant hiss in a language that set the hairs on the elves' necks on end. Dewey stroked Bilbo's head in reply. He spoke in the same low, hissing tongue. "Go. Find your food. Kill with your eyes. Drive them out." Bilbo's head lifted slightly. Though the creature trusted Dewey, the command unsealed the danger the basilisk represented. The air in the valley tightened as the monster, guided by scent and heat, slithered forward into the webbed tunnels to do what Dewey had asked, to use its petrifying gaze and force whatever lay inside to flee into the open light beyond the spider kingdom. The elves only heard cold, wet hisses in their minds, Dewey and the basilisk speaking in parcel tongue. Then, as if on command, the great snake slid into the spider tunnel. "All right, open your eyes," Dewey's voice echoed, and the elves did. "What now?" Legolas asked, and the others looked to Dewey. "Wait," Dewey said. "Bilbo's gone in. He'll flush the spiders out and we'll ambush them from outside." Deep in the tunnels, the serpent basilisk Bilbo moved quickly. "Delicious. I smell delicious food. Where are you?" "The hunt begins," it hissed in parcel tongue. The spider colony had laid sensory silk lines through the passages. Bilbo's presence triggered them instantly. The spiders were alerted and surged toward the source of the scent. To them, an enormous snake in their halls meant a meal. To Bilbo, the spiders were prey. Both sides charged toward the other by coincidence. The tunnels branched and forked, but Bilbo's nose and its ruthlessly precise tracking brought it into the spider nest's heart. A giant spider, one of the top predators, was descending to ambush from above, preparing to spray silk. It never finished. Bilbo raised its head, a playful, mocking curl to its mouth. "Got you." The spider's many compound eyes met Bilbo's yellow stare, and then its life vanished in an instant. It collapsed, lifeless. Bilbo licked its lips, eager to swallow the prize, then stopped. "No, Master said to kill all the delicious ones. I can't eat them yet," it chivied in parcel tongue, and went on hunting. Bilbo descended into a killing frenzy. Wherever it went, giant spiders fell. They had been confident. There were animals larger than a 10-meter snake, and the spiders had hunted large prey before. They had not expected this basilisk to be their natural enemy. Its sense of smell was unerring. Their venom and illusion magics had no effect. Its skin was so slick spider silk could not bind it. It moved through the webs like it moved through empty air. More terrifying than its stealth was the basilisk's gaze. Those yellow Kazalan eyes spelled instant death for anything that met them. Panic spread. Some spiders even tore out their unblinking eyes to avoid the look, relying instead on the sensitive hairs and leg organs that guided them. It did not help. Blind or sighted, they could not evade Bilbo's venom. One bite was fatal and corrosive beyond imagining. Legends claimed only phoenix tears could cure such poison. Horcruxes, so cunning and guarded, could be eaten away by it. There were no phoenixes in this world. Perhaps only Elrond, wielder of Villia, might possess a remedy. For everyone else, Bilbo's bite was certain death. As Bilbo decimated the nest, spiders that managed to flee were met by the elves waiting at the tunnel's mouths. A rain of arrows finished what Bilbo had started. Bodies piled up. Hundreds of giant spiders lay dead. Outside, Dewey was a whirlwind of activity. He collected fresh venom while the spiders were not yet completely dead, storing vials away in his spatial bag. He seemed untroubled by the basilisk tearing through the lair. Then the leader of the nest could not be held back any longer. A shriek echoed through the tunnels, and a colossal spider burst out, 8 spear-thick legs bristling with barbs, a body larger than a house, towering over the trees. Radagast the Brown's face drained of color. "It's Queen Sinatha! Prepare yourselves!" The Spider Queen surged forward as if chasing something toward Dewey's group. "Hailbow's back! Close your eyes!" Dewey shouted, sensing the change. The elves obeyed at once, but their bows and arrows stayed trained on the enormous spider. Hailbow emerged from the tunnels, disheveled and frantic, and pushed its massive body up behind Dewey. "Master, the big delicious one chased me. It's too big, I couldn't handle it," it complained in parcel tongue. Dewey glanced up. The queen's eyes were wrapped in spider silk. No wonder she'd been unafraid of the basilisk's stare. Hailbow was also still a young snake, shorter than even one of the queen's legs, so being driven off made sense. The queen radiated a cold, malignant aura, fangs and claws bared. Even blind, she had fixed Dewey and the elves in her venomous hatred. "You elves will die here, and feed my children," she rasped. "And you, little snake, I will tear you apart myself." Her words, in plain speech, froze everyone. At her signal, thousands of giant spiders poured from the woods, encircling them. Dewey turned to Hailbow. "What did you do down there? Why does she hate you so much?" Hailbow puffed with pride. "I found their brood chamber. There were so many eggs. I poisoned them all with my venom." Dewey laughed and ruffled the snake's scales. "Good work. From now on, I'll give you 1 giant spider to eat every day." Hailbow brightened, then remembered something. "Master, you must take all the spiders I killed out of the lair when you leave. I killed hundreds. And don't forget the eggs. They're my snacks." "All right, I won't forget," Dewey said with an affectionate roll of his eyes, then snapped to business. "Enough chatter. Go deal with the spiders. Do not hurt the elves, or you won't get your snacks." Hailbow launched itself into the swarming mass. Mindful of Dewey's warning, it kept its eyes closed toward the elves and opened them only for the spiders. Now the true scale of the threat showed. The spider army outnumbered the elves, and Queen Sinatha stood at the center with formidable defenses. Elven arrows glanced off her hide. Legolas's and the others' spells barely scratched her. She exhaled poisonous mists, hallucinogenic and disorienting, that could cling to the skin even if the mind was protected by a bubblehead charm. She wove powerful mental illusions that tugged at perception and made the battlefield a nightmare. Thranduil, Radagast, and Dewey threw themselves into the fight without holding back. Thranduil leaped from his elk, sword flashing, and scaled a massive leg with the agility of an elf, driving his blade into the queen's vulnerable underbelly. The queen screamed and thrashed, trying to fling him away. Radagast hammered at her legs with his staff, each blow strong enough to break chitin and bring her stumbling to the ground. Dewey planted his staff and chanted, a single command, "Cleanse!" A brilliant magic burst from the staff, sweeping away the poisonous mist and stripping the silk that blindfolded the queen's eyes. "Hailbow, look at her eyes!" Dewey hissed in Parseltongue. For a moment, the queen froze as sight rushed back into her. A chill of doom crawled over her as she turned, and in that same moment, a pair of blazing yellow eyes appeared out of nowhere to meet hers. Where her gaze landed, life went still. Chapter 153, Reclaim Mirkwood. When those vertical yellow eyes locked onto her, Spider Queen Sinatha's face drained of color. "No," she hissed, but the sound dissolved into a desperate rasp. The great queen collapsed to the ground. The countless facets of her eyes seemed to cloud over, dimmed by dust. Her aura crashed, ebbing away until she was barely more than a broken husk. "Huh? Not dead yet?" Dewey raised an eyebrow, surprised. The basilisk's death gaze had failed to finish her. Perhaps Hailbow was still young, and his power hadn't fully matured. That only underscored how formidable this Spider Queen had been. Many lesser spiders dropped at a single glance from the basilisk, but not her. Dewey wasted no time. He drew Aglos and drove the spear point straight into the queen's head. The weapon punched through her defenses and unleashed its destructive power, tearing her insides to paste. Sinatha was gone in an instant. Thranduil watched the spear, envy flickering across his face. They say no one can stand against Gil-galad's spear and Elendil's sword, Aeglos and Narsil. Seeing them now, they live up to the legend. Among the elves, the divine spear Aeglos was the counterpart to the human relic Narsil. Forged with Noldor skill, it was a rare artifact indeed, and Thranduil's admiration was well placed. There was no time, however, for relic talk. With the queen dead, the remaining giant spiders broke into disorganized flight. The woodland realm's warriors surged after them. Wherever the spiders fled into the nest, Duir sent Bilbo to flush them out or to pick them off. Thranduil watched the basilisk driving their route and couldn't keep his astonishment to himself. "How did you raise such a creature?" he asked Duir. "So dangerous, and yet only a juvenile. When it matures, I fear it will rival a dragon." "You flatter me, your majesty," Duir said with a wry smile. He knew better than to overestimate Bilbo. The basilisk was terrifying and deadly, poisonous fangs and a lethal death gaze, but it had a telling weakness: the crow of a rooster. In folklore, even ancient basilisks trembled at that sound. Duir thought of the old tales, how the great Slytherin basilisk, despite its long life, still recoiled from a rooster's crow, and of schemes to remove that vulnerability. If Saruman had been at hand, Duir mused, perhaps he could have engineered the basilisk away from that flaw. A basilisk without weaknesses would indeed be a fearsome weapon. The elves pursued the spiders through day and night. Only a few escaped beyond Mirkwood, the rest were hunted down and slain. Those that hid in the web tunnels were either driven out by Bilbo or cut down by the elves. At last the forest belonged wholly to the woodland realm again. Thranduil rejoiced and decreed a grand feast to celebrate. Before the celebrations began, he gave Duir and Bilbo formal thanks. Every corpse and treasure gathered from the spiders was to be handed over to Duir. Guided by Bilbo, Duir threaded the spider-webbed labyrinth of the nest, collecting carcasses into his space pouches until they were full. Deep within the nest, he found the incubation chamber, a vast underground cavern draped in silk, studded with enormous egg sacs. Tens of thousands of eggs pulsed faintly beneath their membranes. Duir felt his breath catch. If those eggs had hatched, the numbers of giant spiders would have exploded. Mirkwood could have been overrun. But Bilbo had been ruthless and efficient. Every sac had been punctured. One drop of his venom into a sac was all it took. The poison volatilized and killed every egg within. Duir, grimly impressed, froze several sacs with a charm. Some would be rations for Bilbo. Some he would keep for experimental potion work. He also filled barrels with spider venom, most collected by the elves at Thranduil's behest, and bagged the queen's corpse separately. From Sinatha he harvested a whole barrel of venom and a bundle of nerves, the latter particularly prized for wand cores tailored to offensive and dark magics. He had no need for them personally, but as a wand maker and collector, he could not resist. When Duir and his party returned to the woodland realm, the elves welcomed them as liberators. Duir, Elrohir, Elladan, and Arwen sat at Thranduil's table. Duir was honored with a place beside the king. Thranduil raised his cup. "Duir, because of you and your basilisk, we have reclaimed Mirkwood. The woodland realm owes you a great debt." "To our benefactor," the gathered elves echoed, some raising their glasses from across the hall. Duir acknowledged the toast with a modest lift of his own goblet. "Your Majesty, the victory is owed to many. Let us toast to them all." Thranduil's expression softened. The feast lasted an entire month. Elves did not tire of revelry easily. And only after many courteous refusals did Duir accept the king's parting gift and return to Weathertop with Arwen, Elrohir, and Elladan. Legolas remained behind to help his father oversee the restoration of the southern forests and the resettlement of forces. Back at Hogwarts Castle, Duir exhaled with relief. Arwen went to visit the young eagle Thorondor in the Garden Eyrie. The twins disappeared into the library. Duir, seeing the butler Edward at work, slipped down to the cellar to check on Smaug. The dragon lifted his head at the scent of him, eyes wary, coils of golden muscle instinctively shielding his hoard. Duir grinned. "I'm not here to steal," he said, cutting off the complaint on Smaug's tongue. "I'm here to pay." At that, Duir tipped a space pouch and let a cascade of gems and diamonds pour out, forming a glittering mound as tall as he was. They were Thranduil's reward. Smaug's posture shifted in an instant. Greed smoothed his features as he lavished praise on Duir and quietly dragged the jewels toward his hoard. Dewey left the cellar with Smogs fawning behind him. He refrigerated samples of the spider venom and some frozen eggs in the potion room, then climbed to the tower's 30th floor. There he used an undetectable extension charm to enlarge a room into a space the size of several football fields. He patterned the chamber with webbing and dimmed it until only a pale, moonlit glow remained. In the center, he placed one of the preserved egg sacs, then locked and concealed the door. This would be Hylbo's larder and a future source of venom. Later, it could serve as a breeding reserve, food for the basilisk, and a repository for samples. On the tower's 2nd floor, he approached a small silver snake embossed on an inner wall. Speaking Parseltongue, he said, "Open." The snake shimmered, biting its own tail and forming a knocker. He tugged it. A hidden door swung inward to reveal a room the size of a playing field. Dewey unsealed his space pouches and emptied the spider corpses into the chamber until they formed a great mound. He traced runes along the walls with his wand. As magic bled into the stone, a chill spread through the room. Then, opposite the door, a larger silver serpent coiled into a ring, bit its tail, and became a circular stone portal that ground open to reveal a shaft leading downward, a private passage to the Chamber of Secrets he had cut into the mountain. Dewey did not descend. Instead, he opened a suitcase and released Hylbo. The basilisk slithered out, bloated and satisfied from recent gluttony. Its distended belly nearly snagged the case rim. "Master, it's cold," Hylbo burped, shivering. Dewey eyed the overfed serpent and the mountain of corpses around them. "From now on," he said, "when you're hungry, you come here and feed yourself. Understood?" Hylbo's tail thumped the stone in delight. So much food, and every meal would help him grow, shed, and become stronger. The plan was simple and efficient. A steady reserve of food would accelerate his growth and supply venom for potions and experiments. When the basilisk had settled, Dewey sealed the hidden room. The doorway vanished back into the wall, leaving only a small, easily overlooked silver snake motif behind. Chapter 154, Assault on the Orc Stronghold. On the 9th floor of the tower, inside the Transfiguration classroom, Dewey traced thin red lines through the air with his wand. The lines braided and flowed into a three-dimensional network that looked like a map of a circulatory system. The pattern was intricate, constantly shifting, an entire internal channeling of magical power. It was the map of Born's magic circulation, the secret behind the skin changer's ability to become a massive bear. Dewey had never stopped researching transfiguration, especially the idea of advancing animagus work. If the highest achievement of animagus was only ever an ordinary animal, then years or decades of study would feel like a poor return. That was why so few wizards practiced becoming animagi. By the 20th century, the ministry had only 7 registered animagi, and even with unregistered cases, the total was still a small, 2-digit number. The skill was both perilous and, for most, insufficiently rewarding. If animagi could transform into truly magical creatures, dragons, phoenixes, thunderbirds, everyone would be rushing to master it. Bjorn had given Dewey a template. For the last year, with Arwen, Legolas, and others helping, he had studied Bjorn's internal circulation and finally mapped it. He still didn't dare test it on himself. He wanted experimental subjects, but he didn't consider himself a dark wizard and couldn't bring himself to experiment on innocents. He planned to find willing volunteers. Before he could act, though, Elrohir and the others were leaving. "Are you returning to Rivendell as well?" Dewey asked Arwen. Her eyes brightened, and she nodded with composed grace. "I've been away a long time. I'll go back to Rivendell to be with my father for a while, then return to Lorien to be with my grandparents." Dewey fell silent for a moment, not daring to press. "I think Thorondor will miss you." "And what about you?" she asked. He stumbled over the words, heart thumping. Of course I'll miss you. We're close friends, aren't we?" Arwen's smile was warm. "Yes, we are close friends." Dewey, slightly dazed, produced from his spatial bag an elegant pouch of spider silk, fine and shimmering, and offered it to her. She took it with curiosity. "What's this?" "I wove it from giant spider silk and used a bit of alchemy," Dewey explained. "The interior expands as you put things in, up to about the size of a garden. It's more stable than an undetectable extension charm. I also put in some flue powder, so you can travel between Rivendell, Lorien, and Weathertop whenever you like." Arwen opened the pouch and her eyes widened. Inside was a large bottle of flu powder, more than Dewey had given Elrond before. It would last a person over a year, even with frequent travel. "It's not much," Dewey said quickly. "Don't be frugal with it. Tell me when it runs low." She nodded, smiling brightly. "I will. I'll come visit you in Thorondor when I have time." After seeing the elven siblings off, Dewey felt a brief slump of melancholy, then refocused. He gave instructions to Edward, roused the reluctant Smaug, and headed northeast over the Etten Moors. North of the moors rose the Graham Mountains, a spur of the Misty Mountains where a tribe of orcs had established a stronghold and regularly raided the southern Eriador lowlands. That was where Dewey was headed. Smaug's flight was swift. In less than half a day, they reached the Graham Mountains. Guided by the Palantir's direction, Dewey located the exact spot hidden among the peaks. He patted the dragon's flank and pointed to the valley where the orc stronghold lay. "Down there," he said. Smaug descended wordlessly. The valley that sheltered the stronghold was a place the sun rarely touched. Nearly 10,000 orcs swarmed the place, led by Sarzog and ultimately under Sauron's influence. They had cooperated with Azog and Bolg of the northern mountains in the past, but after Azog and Bolg fell a year ago and the northern host was smashed, the Graham Mountains orcs had become cautious, retreating deeper into the peaks. Rumors of a powerful figure established on Weathertop west of the lowlands had made them even more fearful. They dared not draw attention. That day, the valley was restless with the usual boredom when a lookout suddenly cried out. Shadows eased over the slopes as a colossal shape cut the sky. The orcs gaped, then panic spread like wildfire. "A dragon! A dragon!" someone shrieked and sounded the horn. Chaos erupted. Sarzog watched with taut unease. If Smaug was here, then the one on Weathertop must be near. That wizard, that person, Lord of Dragons, the creatures never spoke his name directly. The rumor went that speaking the name would alert him, and he would ride the dragon down and scorch anyone foolish enough to say it. Orcs called him only by euphemisms to avoid drawing that doom upon themselves. Sarzog himself had, for bravado, used the name in front of his men once. He now wondered if that single utterance had summoned them. Dewey, riding Smaug, had no idea what rumors he had inspired. At his command, Smaug plunged into the valley. Dragonfire roared. Buildings, wooden platforms, and watchtowers were consumed in moments, the air filled with orc screams and the crackling of flame. "Fight back! Get your bows! Crossbows!" Sarzog shouted, forcing order from the panic. Blackened arrows dipped, and dark magic-imbued bolts streaked toward Smaug. Among them were huge, specially forged arrows meant to pierce dragons, poisoned, cursed weapons whose wounds could be fatal. Smaug paid them no heed. His scales were thick, and dwarf-crafted armor sheathed him in an outer shell. Even the largest arrows glanced off the armor and the dragon's hide. He cruised low, tearing through fortifications with massive claws and letting loose pillars of flame. The orc projectiles did little more than hiss away. When the inferno had done its work, Dewey raised his wand. He petrified several surviving orcs and slipped them into his spatial bag, Sarzog among them. Then a familiar notification blinked on the Palantir. "Hogwarts Sign-in System, Graham Mountains detected. Would you like to sign in?" Dewey blinked. He had nearly forgotten the system. He tapped a reply. "Sign in." "Sign in successful. Congratulations on receiving Newt Scamander's fantastic beasts and where to find them." He had hoped for something more immediately useful, but he grinned despite the minor disappointment. After collecting nearly 100 orcs, Dewey and Smaug withdrew from the burning valley, leaving the stronghold a smoldering ruin. The smoke rose in a black column seen from Rivendell and by the Dunedain Rangers patrolling the lowlands. The Rangers reached the Graham Mountains soon after and found the charred remains. Word of the attack spread quickly. The orcs of the Misty Mountains trembled even more, unwilling to venture south, and even more reluctant to speak Dewey's name aloud. Survivors who escaped testified that their leader had been captured because he had called Dewey's name once. Then the wizard himself had come on a dragon, burned their stronghold, and seized Sarzog. Dewey read that absurd rumor in Sarzog's memories and couldn't help but be speechless. How had he, among orcs, become as feared as the Dark Lord? Thank goodness they hadn't taken to using any euphemism akin to "you-know-who," or he might have cracked up. Destroying the Graham Mountain stronghold had served his purpose as well. He transported the captured orcs to the tower, locking them in cells high up where they could do no harm. He took one petrified specimen down to the laboratory for study. The origin of the orcs was contested. One popular theory held that Morgoth had captured elves, tortured and twisted them by dark sorcery until they became the ugly, cruel creatures known as orcs. That would explain the orcs' old hatred of elves. Dewey couldn't confirm the tale, but he could sense magic in them, raw, distorted channels that might yield much under transfiguration. Humanoid subjects like these were exactly the kind he wanted for his experiments. Chapter 155, Magic Transformation. In the laboratory, an orc sat bound by a Petrificus totalis, his face twisted in terror as he watched Dewey approach. Dewey wrinkled his nose in disgust. The orcs smelled like beasts. He muttered a few simple cleaning charms to remove the stench before stepping closer. Then he raised his wand and cast a human transfiguration charm. The orc's body swelled and contorted, changing shape until a small dragon, like a miniature Smaug, stood where the orc had been. Though smaller than the ones in stories, it was still dozens of meters long and dwarfed Dewey. The transformed creature blinked, regained movement, and seeing the tiny wizard before it, lunged with sudden, vicious courage. "Crucio," Dewey said without expression. The dragon collapsed, roaring in agony. Dewey had no taste for prolonged cruelty. After the lesson, he reversed the charm. The dragon reverted to an orc, only the outward appearance had changed. It had none of a dragon's breath or strength. It was an orc inside a draconic shell. Dewey felt a pang of disappointment, but not surprise. True transmutation of one species into another was supposed to be impossible. He tried again, but this time he aimed to do more than change appearances. While casting the transfiguration charm, he attempted to restructure the orc's internal magical circulation, forcing it toward Bjorn's pattern, the circulation of the great bear whose form he sought to emulate. The instant he broke the orc's native flow, chaos erupted. Magical currents tore each other apart inside the creature. In a heartbeat, the orc was ripped to pieces, blood and flesh sprayed everywhere. Dewey raised a shield charm just in time to avoid the splatter. He cleared the mess, retrieved 2 more orcs from their cells, and started anew. He petrified one and set it aside, then focused on the other. This attempt was more cautious. Rather than overthrow the entire circulation at once, he coaxed a small section to adopt Bjorn's pattern. The change held. Encouraged, he replaced more segments, bit by bit. It was painstaking work. Every step demanded perfect concentration and a steady supply of magic to keep the whole system balanced. A single slip would mean another violent, messy failure. Sweat beaded on his brow. For a moment, his focus faltered. The 2 circulations, orc and Bjorn, clashed inside the body. Pain contorted the creature, its limbs twisting grotesquely. Dewey raised a shield in reflex as the orc convulsed, expecting the same explosive end, but instead the body settled into a new form. It hunched, claws sprouted, its mouth jutted forward, fur and hide warped together. The result was a malformed half-orc, half-bear monstrosity, more beast than man. A reversal charm had no effect. The transformation was complete. Even the magic inside the creature had become a hybrid, a fused and mutated flow of orc and skin changer energy. Dewey immobilized the thing with a flick of his wand and, seeing it mad with fury, sent it to the giant spider brood as food. Days passed in the lab. Under Dewey's experiments, orcs became all manner of failed hybrids: bare-furred orcs, orc bodies with bare heads, bare limbs grafted onto humanoid torsos, each monstrosity more grotesque than the last. All failures were fed to the spiders. Orcs disappeared from the cells as quickly as Dewey could fetch them. Finally, he selected Sarzog, the leader of the orcs, as his test subject. Sarzog's terror was plain. He had seen what happened to the other captives and pleaded futilely for mercy, even offering servitude. Dewey ignored him. He had learned from dozens of trials and believed he had mastered the technique enough for a full conversion. He worked carefully, replacing Sarzog's circulation gradually and painstakingly, until at last Bjorn's pattern flowed through the orc entirely. Sarzog groaned, his body swelling and contorting. Under Dewey's watchful gaze, he transformed into a ferocious giant bear, smaller than Bjorn, but still like a mountain, a paw capable of crushing an orc. Dark, almost demonic magic radiated from the beast. Dewey grinned. The creature was no ordinary bear. Something of Bjorn's nature had come through, twisted toward darkness, but unmistakably bear-like. Defindo, Dewey incanted. The bear yelped in pain and roared. A spell that might have felled an orc left only a wound, which knit visibly in seconds. Dewey followed up with Crucio until the beast's resistance was broken, then seized control with Imperio. "Try to return to your original form," he ordered. Under the imperious compulsion, the bear's eyes went vacant. It struggled, and its massive body shrank, bones restructured, muscles realigned. It reverted back into an orc. Dewey had, in effect, created the first orc skin changer, one that could switch between forms. For days he studied Sarzog's new magical circulation, mapping how the flows shifted during transformation and identifying control points. When there was nothing more to learn, he dispatched the orc, ending Sarzog's life with a final spell and sending the body to the spiders. Having unlocked the principles behind Bjorn's circulation, Dewey turned to other archetypes. He examined Smaug's draconic flow, Heilbo the basilisk's serpentine pattern, and Thorondor the giant eagle's aerial currents. He tried grafting these patterns into orcs. For the dragon, the orc's meager reserves could not sustain a draconic form, the creature drained of magic and life, collapsing into a dry, mummified corpse before transformation completed. Basilisk and eagle patterns produced bizarre hybrids, scaly orcs, snake-headed humanoids, winged orcs, and more. The orcs simply lacked the magical capacity to assume fully realized forms of those creatures. Still, Dewey noticed a deeper truth. Despite their different appearances, these creatures' circulatory systems were not radically distinct. The differences lay in subtle configurations. To broaden his dataset, he captured trolls from the forest and wargs from the misty mountains, compiling circulatory maps from many species. Then he began to design entirely new magical circulation patterns, combinations and permutations he hoped would be sustainable in a small-bodied host. Orcs dwindled rapidly. Many exploded or became monsters. Just as his supplies ran dangerously low, inspiration struck. While sketching a new circulation that blended dragon and eagle elements, his hand unconsciously traced a runic symbol for fire into the pattern. He hesitated, but when he tested the combined circulation on an orc, the subject burst into new life. The creature that emerged was a firebird, roughly half the size of a giant eagle, its feathers a streaked iron red and black, and when it opened its beak, it breathed fire. Dewey stood frozen, eyes wide. By merging dragon and eagle circulation motifs and adding a fire rune, he had created something wholly unexpected. Not a phoenix of myth, but a burning avian that could breathe flame. He recorded every detail, every flow and rune. This new pattern might be the key to advancing his animagus, not simply becoming a bear like Bjorn, but to mastering a new, hybrid form. The firebird was far from the ideal he imagined, but it exceeded his expectations. He saved the notes carefully. Whatever came next, this discovery would be the foundation. Dewey had been pleasantly surprised by the unexpected result of his experiment. The orc had become a firebird. The creature combined the magic of dragons and giant eagles with a fire rune at the center of its circulation, creating a new, coherent magical system. It had the build of a giant eagle and could breathe fire like a dragon. Because the original orc's magic had been weak, the new firebird was no match for a true giant eagle. Its breath was magical fire, hotter and more potent than ordinary flames, but nowhere near a dragon's dragon flame. Still, Dewey was pleased. He felt he had, in a sense, created something new. The body might have been that of a firebird, but the soul remained orcish. Its magic circulation had undergone a qualitative change. After the transformation, Dewey threw himself back into studying the firebird. His ambitions were larger than simply owning a fire-breathing animagus. He wanted to evolve the animagus into a phoenix. The phoenix, the immortal bird, repeatedly burned and was reborn. That cycle of nirvana and rebirth amounted to a sort of immortality. If he could create a phoenix animagus, perhaps he could inherit that power. Living among Arwen and the other elves made Dewey increasingly aware of mortality. Wizards lived long lives. The deeper their magic, generally the longer they lived. But they were not truly immortal. Even the Dunedain could outlast most wizards in apparent youth. Aragorn, for example, still looked like a man in his 30s when he was 80 or 90. If Dewey reached that age, he imagined he would be an old man. He therefore prepared two paths to extend his life: evolve his animagus into a phoenix, or create a philosopher's stone. The idea of turning a bird animagus into a phoenix had come to him after meeting Bjorn and getting a bird animagus. If small birds could become phoenixes in legend, why not an owl or a firebird? The problem was that Middle-earth had no phoenixes to study. There was no local reference. To learn what he could, Dewey summoned fantastic beasts and where to find them, the copy he had acquired in the Graham Mountains. Newt Scamander's book cataloged magical creatures worldwide, and its chapter on phoenixes was as thorough as it could be. Scamander even thanked Dumbledore for lending Fawkes for study and included a portrait of the magnificent bird, golden red plumage, long tail feathers, golden beak and claws, and black eyes. Dewey stared at the portrait with longing. The chapter described the phoenix's habits and abilities, but offered little about its inner nature. The only thing that pointed him toward a starting place was a single line attributed to Dumbledore. The phoenix is born of fire, a spirit nurtured by flames. It was a slender thread, but as one of the few wizards who had kept a phoenix, Dumbledore's words carried weight. That sentence gave Dewey a direction. He would investigate the nature of fire and the phoenix, and then try to apply those findings to the firebird. If he could somehow create the conditions for a phoenix to arise in Middle-earth, his animagus might have a chance at true transformation. For knowledge of fire, besides Gandalf, who wielded a ring of fire, he could think of no one better. And since he had joined the White Council, reaching out to Gandalf made perfect sense. After nearly half a year holed up in his laboratory, Dewey finally left the tower to pursue other matters. The first person he met upon emerging was Luke, now Town Mayor Luke. Hogsmeade at the mountain's base had exploded in growth in the last year and a half. The village had become a town of nearly 10,000. People continued to arrive every day, hoping to settle there. As town mayor, Luke made regular trips up the mountain to report on affairs below. Dewey usually remained absorbed in experiments, but Luke always kept detailed ledgers, taxes, new residents, land distributions, and brought them for Dewey's review. "Luke, what brings you this time?" Dewey asked in the reception hall. Luke's face could not hide his excitement. "My lord, I have wonderful news. Remember Lucky, the mayor of Bree? He came to visit Hogsmeade a while back. He wanted to pay his respects to you, but you were busy, so he didn't disturb you." He beamed. "And Bree wants to pledge allegiance to you. They want to become a town under your protection." Dewey blinked. "Bree wants to surrender to me?" He'd heard of Lucky, ambitious, hungry for power and wealth. It sounded unlikely. Did the mayor really say that? Can he speak for all the townspeople? Luke laughed, delighting in Dewey's surprise. Of course he didn't say it willingly. If he hadn't, he wouldn't be mayor anymore. Dewey raised an eyebrow. "What did you do?" Luke's grin widened. "I convinced half of Bree's residents to move to Hogsmeade." He spoke with mischievous pride. "Our taxes are lower, we have more land to distribute, and living under your protection, well, people prefer it. Those who moved wrote letters back home praising your power, your justice and benevolence, the beauty of your castle, and the peace and prosperity here. They told their friends and family how lucky they felt to be your subjects." "So Lucky panicked," Luke continued. "The remaining residents demanded that Bree accept your rule so they could have the same treatment. If Lucky wanted to keep his position, he had to go to Weathertop Castle and request your governance." Dewey could picture the scene and felt a faint amusement at the thought of the Bree mayor's fury. He had not intended to annex Bree, but since the offer had been arranged for him, he saw no reason to refuse. With a nod from Dewey, Mayor Lucky and representatives from Bree soon came to Weathertop Castle carrying land registers, tax books, and resident rolls. In the Great Hall, before witnesses, they presented the documents and formally pledged their allegiance. Bree became the second town under Dewey's rule. He allowed Lucky to remain mayor. Administrative talent was scarce, and Lucky, for all his greed, could manage Bree adequately. With Dewey above him and Luke watching from Hogsmeade, Lucky's ambitions would be kept in check. Lucky accepted the arrangement gratefully and professed loyalty in full. He wanted to please Dewey and keep his office. He also nursed the private hope of replacing Luke as Dewey's top subordinate. Dewey watched the new rivalry between Bree's mayor and Hogsmeade's with mild amusement. Bree sat at the crossroads of the east-west and north-south roads. Its position made it strategically valuable for trade and influence. Lucky vowed to develop Bree beyond Hogsmeade's success to prove his worth. As long as their competition stayed within normal bounds, Dewey had no intention of intervening. He had other fires to study, literal and figurative, and an animagus to turn into something more than a bird with a rune of flame. Chapter 157, Fangorn Forest. After settling Bree's allegiance, Dewey prepared to go out. Apart from wanting to find Gandalf, hoping the wizard's wisdom and knowledge of fire might help him evolve his animagus into a phoenix, Dewey planned to sign in at various places in search of unexpected rewards. If he could somehow pick up any magic knowledge about the phoenix, even better. Above all, he yearned for Dumbledore's memories and understanding. As the Master of Fawkes, Dumbledore's knowledge of phoenixes must be deep. It was frustrating that what he gained from each sign-in wasn't something he could choose. Once he had arranged matters at the castle, Dewey took out the Palantir to locate Gandalf. The image in the crystal surprised him. Gandalf was talking with a tall Ent, Treebeard. "Is this in Fangorn?" Dewey muttered. He recognized the figure as an Ent, not a Huorn, humanoid, able to move and speak. In the orb, Gandalf suddenly seemed to sense something. "Who's there?" he cried into the void. Then, as if recognizing the presence, his watchful look softened into puzzlement. "Duir, is that you?" Dewey could not reply across that distance. Having confirmed Gandalf's location, he used the flow network and traveled to Lorien, the closest fireplace to Fangorn. "Duir, why are you here?" Arwen asked, pleasantly surprised. Dewey had assumed she'd be in Rivendell. She greeted him with a smile. "I need Gandalf's help with something. He's in Fangorn, so I came to Lorien as a waypoint," Dewey explained. When he noticed a flash of disappointment in her expression, he added, "Would you like to come with me to Fangorn?" Arwen's eyes lit up like stars. "Yes," she said, smiling. Naturally, they sought the lady's blessing. Galadriel nodded kindly. Celeborn stayed impassive, neither objecting nor offering a warm welcome. His calm gaze made Dewey feel a little chilled. Under the watchful eyes of the lord and lady, Dewey handed Arwen a flying broom. He shifted into his owl animagus form and flew beside her as they left Lorien, heading south. Fangorn was not far. At the forest's edge they landed. Dewey turned back into human form. Arwen settled on her broom. They did not rush inside. The Ents of Fangorn were famously exclusive. Humans and dwarves had once harmed parts of the forest, and the Ents resented intruders. Many who entered Fangorn did not leave alive. Though Dewey was a wizard, he was still human, and he bore the title Tree Cutter. Worse, his wand was made from the heartwood of a Huorn, a close relative of the Ents. He felt apprehensive. Carefully, he stowed his old willow heartwood wand, the one made with Huorn heartwood, and replaced it with another, a melon tree shaft with a strand of Galadriel's hair as the core. He fastened the white gemstone brooch Thranduil had given him and summoned his Patronus, sending a message to Gandalf deep in the forest. Arwen, who had lived with Dewey for over a year, understood his caution and smiled at him with gentle amusement. Dewey could only feel fond and a little sheepish. When you were a guest under someone else's roof, you wore humility like a cloak. The trees themselves obliged soon enough. The forest stirred, branches shifted, creating a wide path, and an Ent emerged, easily 6 or 7 meters tall. He was vast and sturdy, heavy-limbed, his skin like green-gray bark with moss and sparse leaves clinging to him. Each step he took made the ground tremble. Perched on his broad shoulder was Gandalf, pipe in hand, smiling down at them. "Gandalf," Dewey waved. The Ent stopped, gently setting Gandalf on the ground a few paces away. "Long time no see, Duir," Gandalf called as he strode forward. "And the beautiful late Lady Evenstar." "Mithrandir." Arwen inclined her head in greeting. Gandalf grinned and then introduced the Ent. "This is my old friend Treebeard, leader of the Ents." He turned to Treebeard. "This lovely elven lady is the Evenstar of Lorien and Rivendell, the White Princess of the Noldor, daughter of Elrond. And this is the black-robed wizard from Hogwarts at Weathertop I told you about, Duir, master of the dragon Smaug, bane of the orcs, and my companion." Dewey managed a polite bow. "Hello, Mr. Treebeard. I've long heard of the Shepherd of the Trees. It's an honor." Treebeard looked down at them with a voice slow and deep as far-off thunder. "Welcome, elven lady." He spoke to Arwen with obvious warmth. Elves and forests shared an ancient affinity, and Ents had been awakened by the elves in the first days. Toward Dewey, however, his gaze sharpened. Brown eyes flecked with green searched him out. "I sense a grievance between you and the trees," Treebeard said. "It seems you have harmed trees before." Dewey's heart sank. He did not hide his past. He told Treebeard about the trouble with the horns in the old forest. Treebeard listened in silence for a long time. Dewey began to worry, but Gandalf's quiet, companionable smile at his side steadied him. At last, Treebeard spoke. "You are Gandalf's friend, and that counts for much. If you promise not to harm trees again, then Fangorn will welcome you." "I promise I will not actively harm trees," Dewey said. Treebeard studied him deeply, then inclined his head. "Then come." He lifted Gandalf to his shoulder once more and turned back into the forest, moving slowly but covering ground with each huge stride. Dewey breathed easier. He and Arwen mounted their brooms and followed. As Treebeard passed, other trees and denizens of the wood made way. He moved like a king through his own realm. They followed him all the way to the Ents' dwelling at the foot of the Misty Mountains. Welling Hall was set into the mountain like a great carved hall, with a wide open space before it. The trees lining the approach grew larger and straighter, and as they approached the interior, Dewey noticed that many of them were horns, standing sentry like living gatekeepers. Inside, the hall rose to a cave ceiling some 50 feet overhead, the walls curving up to a sheer face where a central opening let in light and water. A huge stone table dominated the space, no chairs, while to one side lay a low, giant bed of hay and bark. Everything felt primitive and natural, as if the room had simply grown up from the earth itself. Dewey realized this was Treebeard's home. Ents did not live in groups. Each guarded its own grove. Dewey saw no other Ents nearby. Only in matters of importance, an Entmoot, did they gather from across the forest. Treebeard set Gandalf down and invited them to sit where they wished. He placed 2 enormous containers on the stone table, and when he hovered his hands above them, they glimmered with golden and green light, bathing the hall in a warm glow. He moved to a large vat with a heavy stone lid, lifted it, and scooped out a liquid with a long-handled ladle. He filled 1 large bowl and 3 smaller ones and set them before them. Gandalf's eyes shone. "You're in luck today," he said. "That is Entdraught, unique to the Ents. You can't find it anywhere else." Dewey remembered. He thought of Merry and Pippin after the War of the Ring. The Entdraught had healed their wounds, washed away their weariness, and even made them grow taller, longer-limbed than before. The memory made him pulse with excitement. A drink that might make one taller. That was tempting. Who would refuse? Chapter 158. Ent Drink Duir watched expectantly as Treebeard set a bowl of Entdraught on the stone table before him. The table was as tall as Duir himself. He declined Treebeard's polite offer to lift him up, and with a flick of his wand, conjured 3 high stools for himself, Gandalf, and Arwen. Treebeard refused any chair. He simply eased his great feet into the stream basin, as if drinking the water through his toes, then lifted his enormous bowl and drained the Entdraught in a single leisurely swallow. Duir took his stool and leaned his elbows on the table. He held the wide wooden bowl with both hands and sipped. To the tongue, the Entdraught was almost like water, with a faint, indefinable scent of evening woods, clean and green. The taste was mild, but the magic in it was not. It moved upward from his toes in a slow, warm tide. Numbness and energy chased each other through his limbs. His skin prickled, his scalp tingled, and he felt vitality seeping into every joint and bone. More astonishingly, he felt his internal organs strengthen, his bones harden, his muscles knit denser. He could even sense the well of magic inside him growing deeper. Duir's eyes widened. This was no mere tonic. It was a life-giving draught, an elixir that improved the body across the board. He drank the rest in eager gulps until his belly was pleasantly full. The draught continued to take hold, and a drowsy warmth spread through him. Arwen, who had also tasted the Entdraught but showed no outward change, watched him with concern. "Duir, are you all right?" "Fine," he managed. "It's very strong. It's making me sleepy." Gandalf, sipping slowly as though the draught were wine, smiled. "Rest, Duir. Sleep will finish its work." Treebeard, with characteristic gentleness, offered his bed. Duir thanked him and, too heavy with sleep to bother improving the straw, simply collapsed onto the hay. Sleep took him at once. When he woke, the hay and bark smelled of fresh wood and green grass. Treebeard's bed was primitive but clean. Arwen was already at his side, glad to see him stir. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Great," Duir said, stretching. He felt as if he had been renewed, energy thrumming through him. "How long was I asleep?" 12 hours, she answered with a smile. 12? He sat up, surprised, then noticed he couldn't see Gandalf or Treebeard nearby. "Where are they?" "Outside. They were waiting for you." Duir rose and felt different the moment he stood. He seemed taller, his limbs felt firmer, his muscles had a new, compact strength. When he checked, the change wasn't imagination. The depth of his magic, the magic song within him, had noticeably increased. It was the equivalent of a year's meditation, if not more. A small notification flickered before his mind. The Hogwarts Sign-in System had registered his location in Fangorn Forest and asked him to sign in while he slept. He had accepted in his sleep. Sign-in successful. Congratulations on obtaining Severus Snape's potions notes. A thick notebook lay before him. It wasn't exactly the Half-Blood Prince's marginalia Harry had found. Rather, it was an entire archive of Snape's potions research from his student days to his final work. Recipes and refinements, annotations on ingredients, and even a few spells. Muffliato, Langlock, a curious toenail-growing hex, Levicorpus and Liberacorpus, and tucked among the inked pages, Sectum Sempra. For Duir, a middling wizard with a hunger for practical power, the book was a treasure beyond price. He turned the pages with reverent hands. Snape's notes offered clearer, more efficient recipes, alternatives and substitutions, and deep analyses of components. Combined with the herb lore of someone like Professor Sprout, knowledge Duir imagined drawing from Arwen and the forest, he could translate ingredients into Middle-earth equivalents. Potions that sharpened wit, brought luck, or prolonged life seemed suddenly within reach. The Philosopher's Stone, too, came to his mind, not an instant key to immortality, but the heart of the elixir of life. Duir knew the old cautionary tale. Flamel's long life had been accompanied by frailty, but he also believed that with sufficient mastery of potions, one might mitigate age itself. The stone and the right potions together could be a kind of engineered longevity. He grinned. Fortunate indeed, an enormous boost in his physical and magical constitution, and Snape's notes as well. Arwen, unaware of the system prompt, watched him beam and tilted her head. Is growing taller really that pleasing? Duir puffed his chest with the childish pride of a man who had just scored something personal. I grew 5 inches, 13 centimeters. I'm a whole head taller than you now. He had been a respectable 1.85 meters before, tall among ordinary men, but not among elves. Arwen herself was about 1.8 meters. Lady Galadriel towered at 1.93 meters. Now Duir measured up at 1.98 meters. The confidence that came with those extra inches warmed him. Arwen's eyes softened, and a faint smile lit her face. Very well, Mr. Grown-up Duir. Come, Treebeard and Gandalf are waiting. Outside the hall of flowing water, beneath a leafy dome, Gandalf sat quietly smoking his pipe, eyes half closed in meditation. Treebeard reclined with his feet in the stream, looking as though he listened to stories older than any living thing. Duir and Arwen moved more softly than usual out of respect, but Gandalf and Treebeard both turned and looked up. Gandalf exhaled a ring of smoke and chuckled. It seems you've grown. This old man will have to look up to you now. I grew 5 inches, Duir announced, unabashed. He turned to Treebeard. Thank you for the Entdraught. It's done me a world of good. Duir then produced a small bottle. This is a plant growth potion I brewed. Please, accept it. Treebeard sniffed the bottle with obvious curiosity and a slow delight in anything that mattered to trees. He uncorked it and let a single drop fall on a nearby sapling. Immediately, the little tree surged upward, branches thickening and leaves unfurling until it stood, quick as a heartbeat, as a full-grown tree. Treebeard's eyes brightened, his gaze toward Duir warmed. I like your gift very much, he rumbled. Wizard, do you have more? I would trade. I could give Entdraught in return for this. Duir's heart leapt. He had already felt what even one bowl of Entdraught could do. To have more would be a boon. He had only one more bottle of growth potion left, but he agreed gladly to the exchange. He traded that last bottle for a jar of Treebeard's Entdraught, 3 times the portion he himself had drunk. Treebeard's voice was slow and kindly. If you make more growth potion, you may come again and trade. But the Ent draught is scarce and slow to brew. You will not take it forever. Duir agreed happily. The promise was enough, a rare draught for the price of a potion, and a future opening between a wizard and an Ent that might yet grow into something valuable. Chapter 159, Eternal Fire. Duir accepted another can of Ent draught from Treebeard, but did not drink it at once. Treebeard had warned him, Ent draught is potent and brings a strong after-effect. Ents prefer to lie down after drinking, to keep the draught from rushing to their heads. To drink too much in a short time would overly burden the body. Heated, Duir divided the can into 3 portions and poured them into 3 small bottles. He kept one for himself and intended the others for Gandalf and Arwen. Gandalf shook his head and declined. "I've drunk this draught many times," he said with a twinkle. "It no longer affects me. If I want any, I'll ask Treebeard. Don't waste it on me." Treebeard nodded in agreement. There was plenty to spare, so Duir smiled and said, "In that case, Gandalf, I'll save your share for Bilbo." Gandalf brightened at the notion and laughed. "Then I'm looking forward to Bilbo becoming the tallest hobbit in the Shire." Arwen tried to refuse her bottle as well, offering it back to Duir, but he would not let her. He placed the bottle in her hand and shrugged. He could always trade for more Ent draught later. When he returned to Weathertop to make more growth potions, he could exchange again with Treebeard. With the draught business settled, Gandalf asked the question that had brought Duir to Fangorn. Why had he come? Duir did not answer at once. Instead, he reached into his spatial pouch and withdrew an enormous, faintly smoking bird. The creature lay unconscious, its plumage a deep, living red that radiated heat. They had all seen great birds, but none had ever seen one like this. Gandalf stepped closer, baffled. "What sort of bird is this? I have never seen its like." Treebeard, who had watched many things in his long years, said this was new to him as well. "Its body is like a furnace, ready to spew flame at any moment, somewhat like a dragon and yet like a bird. Could it be a hybrid?" Treebeard's wariness was plain. He did not fear fire himself, but flames could harm the living trees of the forest. Arwen, who had also never seen such a creature, peered with curiosity. "Duir, what is this? Where did you find it?" Duir told them in plain words about his experiment. He had been trying, as an experiment in magical transformation, to combine the circulatory magic of the giant eagles with that of dragons, and then apply that pattern to a normal orc. The result had not been a controlled transformation, but an accident. A fire-breathing bird had come into being. Gandalf stared. "You made this from an orc? Remarkable." Arwen's face sharpened with recognition. "That must be what my father heard, news from Rivendell of the orc stronghold in the Gram, or Greathorn, mountains being destroyed. You took orcs for your experiments?" Duir nodded. "Transformations are perilous. If I needed test subjects, orcs were the only ones I dared trouble." None of them objected. Orcs were a violent, malignant race, and pity for them was not expected. Gandalf asked, "How should I help you, Duir?" Duir placed a trembling hand on the firebird's flank and explained his real purpose. The bird was a blueprint. He wanted to breed something higher, an undying sacred bird that would undergo nirvana and be reborn. When its old body decayed, it would plunge into flame and rise again from its ashes. He conjured, with the tip of his wand, a shimmering image of a phoenix, a noble, incandescent bird that burst into blossom of fire and then returned whole. Gandalf watched the image and listened as Duir laid out the phoenix's abilities. Lights kindled behind the wizard's eyes. Inspiration and old knowledge stirred. When Duir finished, Gandalf said softly, "If such a species were spoken of in these lands, I should have believed it real from the way you describe it." Treebeard and Arwen both nodded, Arwen's eyes especially bright with admiration as she looked at Duir. "What is it called?" she asked. "Phoenix, or the undying bird," Duir answered. "Phoenix," Arwen repeated, pleased by the name. Duir turned to Gandalf. "I need your help. I envision the phoenix as a being of elemental flame. Its undying nature depends on fire, and your understanding of fire is unmatched." Gandalf, modest as ever, brushed the praise aside. "My understanding is not as great as you say," he replied. "But if you would have me help create such a creature, I will do what I can." They set to work in Treebeard's ancient hollows in Fangorn. Arwen made a friend of Treebeard, often riding on his shoulder as he patrolled the root halls. She visited other Ents and returned bearing gifts of fruits, flowers, and pretty stones. Under Gandalf's guidance and with Duir's experiments, the Firebird's magical circulation improved. The presence of the Ring of Fire, Narya, on Gandalf's hand added a new quality, and the bird evolved from merely a large fire-breathing thing into a creature that truly burned. But when the time for Nirvana came, progress stopped. The bird would turn to ash under their eyes, but would not rise. They discovered that Nirvana required two things: a fire of Nirvana, the Phoenix's own undying fire, and vast reserves of magic to carry the transformation through. Neither could be omitted. Ordinary flames would not suffice. The fire had to be an undying flame. Gandalf explained the varieties of undying flame in Arda. There was the fire of Arnor, the sun's fire, so far beyond reach of mortals it was effectively unattainable. The light Gandalf could summon was sunlight, not the raw primal sunfire itself. There were the Balrog's flames, a dark, terrible, undying fire that clung to a being of Maya. There was also the fire bound to the Ring of Fire, Narya, a magical flame, unseen by the eye, the source of the ring's power. Beyond those, there existed a single more sacred thing, the secret fire of Iluvatar, the life-giving flame in the void that bestows true being. Even Morgoth had sought it and failed. That fire was beyond them all. Duir added that he possessed a kind of Gubraith Sil, fire he had condensed himself, which could not be extinguished by ordinary means, yet was essentially his own magic shaped into flame, and not truly the undying fire required. Gandalf revealed the secret of Narya without concealment. Duir's head ached with the tally. Excluding the secret fire and the sunfire, only two truly undying flames remained within reach, the Balrog's fire and the ring's fire. He could not take Narya's fire without betraying Gandalf. The ring itself rested on Gandalf's hand. That left the Balrog. Knowing the Balrog's location did not make the thought easier. Balrogs were Maya, ancient, potent spirits, and one had been the reason Gandalf had once come to combat to the death. To seek its flame was dangerous indeed. Duir felt the temptation to abandon the Phoenix project for the time being until he could grow stronger. Gandalf saw the turmoil across his young friend's face and gave a soft, encouraging smile. "Perhaps I have good news for you," he said. "The dwarves of the Lonely Mountain intend to reclaim Moria." Duir startled. "They intend to go to Moria? Have they forgotten there is a Balrog there?" He meant the Balrog that had lain in the deep halls of Khazad-dûm since dwarves mining mithril had woken it, and which had caused that once great realm to fall into shadow. Gandalf shrugged. "Dwarves are stubborn. Moria is Durin's folk's ancestral home, full of treasure and mithril. They will not give it up without trying. Thorin's line once risked Smaug for Erebor. I do not doubt their will to reclaim their ancient halls." "Do they know about the Balrog?" Duir pressed. "They do," Gandalf said. "They are discussing. No decision has been taken yet. But if you were to join them, your name, your reputation as the Dragon Lord, would give them confidence. I think they will decide quickly." Duir gave a wry, self-deprecating smile. "You overestimate me, Gandalf. I have no confidence against a Balrog. Even with dwarves, victory seems unlikely." Gandalf laughed lightly. "Don't be so modest. I will go as well. This is not something I would miss." Duir's eyes lit at the answer. "You will come too?" "Of course," Gandalf said. "It would be a dangerous and stirring undertaking.